Back. Shall we get started? Oh, there we are. We're all here. Terrific. Everyone ready? All right. Good evening and welcome to tonight's study session of the Boulder City Council. I am Council Member Tina Marquis, and thank you for joining us. We have on tonight's agenda 3 items. Our first item will be the Access Management and Parking Strategy, AMPS, Transportation Demand Management, TDM, update. Our second item is the discussion on the City Behavioral Health Framework, and our third item is the Council Committee appointments for 2025. Before we go into our work item, I would like to outline how the meeting will be conducted. We will review the staff's presentations and then we will have time for questions. At the end of the presentation, we will conduct our council discussion with staff. If you have questions, please wait for staff to complete their presentation. We will now turn it over to our city manager, Nuria, who is in fact going to be Pam for this evening to introduce our item.
Thank you, Councilmember Marquis and rest of council, and thank you for giving me the humble opportunity to keep Nuria's seat warm for this evening. I just want to provide a brief introduction to our first item this evening, our update on the access management and parking strategy and transportation demand management project updates. And as Tina mentioned throughout this conversation, you'll hear it referred to frequently as AMPS and TDM. This item has taken significant cross-departmental collaboration, including but not limited to team members from Planning and Development Services, Transportation and Mobility, Community Vitality, and more. Like many city efforts, this project is highly interdisciplinary and has required extensive parallel and cross-cutting work. We bring this forward to you tonight with the intention to continue to deliver the scope of this project to be in compliance with the Colorado House Bill 24-1304 that takes effect June 30th of 2025 regarding restrictions on enforcement of minimum parking requirements. And finally, staff believes this AMPS effort represents a chance to enhance consistency for all who interact with the related policies, including members of the public, developers, and city staff alike. I'm pleased to turn the meeting over to Lisa Hood of Planning and Development Services.
Thanks, Pam. Great intro. Good evening, council members. I'm Lisa Hood. I'm a principal city planner for Planning and Development Services, and I'm joined by my teammates on this project, Chris Haglin with Transportation and Mobility and Samantha Bromberg with Community Vitality. We're excited to bring this update on the AMPS project and specifically the code and policy enhancements to you tonight. You last saw this project at a study session back in August. We've been hard at work doing additional best practices research and further developing options and recommendations. Like Pam already said, with the 3 different departments, there are also, you might remember, 3 different focus areas. We're looking at our off-street parking requirements, our transportation demand management requirements, and our on-street parking management strategies. With all of these, they're very interrelated, from thinking of it as simply as they're all kind of related to parking, but also more complicated in that they all interrelate so deeply. So if we affect one of them, it's going to affect the other 2. So that's why we really wanted to take this project with all 3 legs of this stool, essentially. So what we're working on is reimagining the approach to parking regulation in Boulder, updating our transportation demand management requirements that haven't been updated in a long time, making sure that they're more streamlined and predictable and also more enforceable for the future in a way that can further influence travel behavior in the city. Also making sure that we're efficiently utilizing the public right-of-way related to on-street parking. Just some policy background, this project also implements a ton of different policies in our Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan, as well as our many measurable objectives in the Transportation Master Plan. We talked about this back in August, about using this project to reach these objectives like reducing our vehicle miles traveled, increasing our mode share of walking, biking, and transit, and reducing or improving our or working towards our climate goals by reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, among the other really important measurable objectives in the Transportation Master Plan. Just a reminder on the project scope, we did confirm that project scope at that August study session. But just a reminder that the project scope is to implement the final outstanding recommendations from the AMPS report that was adopted by council back in 2017. So there's actually just 2 items remaining from that report that haven't already been implemented: updating the off-street parking standards and creating a TDM plan ordinance for new developments. I went into the background back in August, so I don't want to get too long into the history, but you might remember that this project's been going on since 2014. So this is the final piece of the project. The project was paused for a few years during COVID. Then it was placed back on the staff work plan last year. And that was something that was confirmed by council, even though it wasn't necessarily a council work plan priority project, because it was something already in flight. But you might remember at the retreat, council confirmed the importance of this project. And as we reinitiated the project, we had a new factor to bring into play, which Pam already introduced, the House bill that was adopted by the state legislature, which prohibits cities like Boulder from requiring minimum parking spaces for certain types of development within distance of transit. So as we thought through the implications of that state bill and how that would apply in Boulder and affect our work towards the off-street parking standard side of this, we began moving more towards the idea of eliminating minimum parking requirements. And as we moved towards that, we really needed to incorporate thinking about the on-street parking management strategies holistically with these other 2 items to make sure that we're really thinking about all things related to parking at the same time. In regards to applicability, like any code change or almost every code change that we work on, the code changes that you'll see in this project will apply to new development and redevelopment. So just want to be clear that those don't typically apply retroactively to properties that aren't seeking some type of approvals through the city. So at the time of an alteration or addition or new construction, that's when these new requirements would come into place. But if it's just a property that's not changing, it's not something that we would go proactively and require compliance with these new regulations. That's just not how typically zoning standards work. I don't want to go through each of these because I know we have limited time for the presentation, but just a reminder of the feedback that we received back in the August study session. Council confirmed the scope that staff had recommended. We talked about a number of different topics. And then we also took this to Planning Board and the Transportation Advisory Board for their guidance and direction last fall. They similarly supported staff's recommended scope. We had a lot of great conversations that have led us to do some additional research on certain topics. And then we were actually back at Transportation Advisory Board last night with the exact same memo that you all saw and the recommendations. And just to be brief, generally they were supportive of the recommendations for each of the 3 topics. And we had again, great discussion on each of those focus areas. All right, so each one of the 3 of us is going to take one of the focus areas. So I'm going to give an overview of the off-street parking standards section. You might remember back in August, I went through a lot of data collection results. We've been collecting parking utilization data for over 10 years in Boulder to understand and inform this project. But the key takeaway to remember is that across all land uses, more parking is available than is being used at peak times. We further dug into this issue over the last couple of months to try to understand kind of the landscape of parking in Boulder and how much space is being used for parking. You can start at the left if you look at the map of Boulder. When we think about just off-street parking, so this doesn't include any parking that's happening on the streets, just private parking lots, or any parking lots, any parking areas, 10% of the city's land, private land, is dedicated to parking. And you can actually see in the map, that's about the area that would, if you put it all in one place, it would take up. That's 1,500 acres of parking. How did we get here? We've had minimum parking requirements for 75 years. So you might remember minimum parking requirements usually work in a ratio. So for an example of a typical 2,500 square foot restaurant would actually require 21 parking spaces, which the space for that parking takes up 3 times the amount of land area for the parking than the actual use of the restaurant. Then we dug into how many household vehicles there are in Boulder. There's about 3 spaces available for every household vehicle that we have. And I know you might be thinking we have a lot of commuters that come into Boulder. Even if you took every single person that works or lives outside of Boulder, if they all came into Boulder on the same exact day in their own single occupancy vehicle, and every vehicle that lives in Boulder stays in Boulder, we would still have extra parking spaces left over. So this is just to provide you kind of a picture of the landscape after 75 years of requiring minimum parking. And when we think about a new paradigm without minimum parking requirements, that's where these other two items in the project really come to light. So this leaves us space. If we're not focusing on minimum parking requirements, we can focus more on our transportation demand management and how we're managing our on-street parking. And then also just physically how we can reimagine the space that's been used for parking for other uses like parks or affordable housing or working towards our walkable neighborhood goals. So there's a number of recommendations related to several topics in your memo. I won't go too much into detail because there's lots more detail in the memo, but just to go over each briefly, staff is continuing to recommend that we eliminate minimum parking requirements citywide for all land uses. That was confirmed by council back in August, but we've done further digging, looking at the benefits and drawbacks, best practices research. There's many, many communities throughout the country that have already done this that we can learn from, and we do recommend eliminating minimum parking requirements. We also looked into maximum parking requirements. A lot of those cities, as they get rid of minimums, they'll implement maximums. And we're not actually recommending moving forward with that. We just don't see in the data and research that there's enough benefit. It doesn't move the needle enough to have a maximum parking requirement to basically make the administration of another zoning parking regulation worth it. Thirdly, we've heard a lot of comments about our bike parking requirements. While it wasn't initially part of the AMPS recommendations, bike parking is within the same chapter of the land use code as vehicle parking. So we've been looking at that. We studied the numbers that we have. Actually, if we go back to the first phase of AMPS, that actually was to create the bike parking requirements that we have now. So we've kind of come full circle. But if we look at other communities, we looked at over 30 different communities. Boulder is still has one of the highest bike parking requirements for almost every use compared to these other communities. So we don't think that there is a need to increase the number of requirements, but what we've heard from several people is that the design requirements could be looked at, and we can make sure that we are accommodating the types of bikes that are more common these days, like cargo bikes and e-bikes, by tweaking those design standards. And so we're committed to working with stakeholders that are interested in this topic to develop some changes to those design standards that can accommodate people's needs. The final two are topics that came up at that initial study session: shared parking and EV charging. Shared parking is something we're going to continue to look into. If we don't have minimum parking requirements, it's not necessarily a requirement we have to put into the zoning code, but it is something that we want to try to understand where the city's role can be in facilitating shared parking so that parking can be used more efficiently, off-street parking can be used more efficiently throughout the city. And then related to EV charging, we did take a look at our EV requirements. They're actually housed in our energy conservation code, so they're not in the land use code or zoning code. But when we look at other comparable communities, we do have comparable requirements to those other communities. And so we don't think that at this time we need to rethink that. The energy conservation code was just recently adopted, and there wouldn't be much purpose to duplicating that into the zoning code. So those are all the recommendations related to off-street parking. And I'm going to pass it over to Chris Hagelin to talk about transportation demand management.
Thank you, Lisa. Good evening, council members. Chris Hagelin, Principal Project Manager in Transportation and Mobility, here to present on the TDM component of this project. Next slide, please. Thank you. In 2014, when staff began working on this project, they were directed to align the parking code update with a new TDM ordinance for new development that works in an environment without minimum parking requirements, and one that would set measurable targets for TDM plans and provide the city with a legal mechanism to monitor compliance. Next slide, please. The current TDM plan process is initiated by site review requirements. TDM plans are customized for each project, but are really limited in scope and impact without an ordinance that requires targets or monitoring for our largest projects. This customized approach does not provide enough clarity of expectations or consistency for city staff, the public, or developers. And the TDM plans are primarily focused on infrastructure and amenities, since very few TDM programs can actually be implemented by a developer from the onset of their project. TDM programs are implemented after occupation by employers and residential property managers, and then are used by employees and residents. Though we have had success in requiring 3 to 5 year commitments for eco passes with a very high rate of voluntary continuation of the programs by the tenants after that period. Next slide, please. In the fall of 2024, boards and council supported a tiered approach to ensure that the focus of the ordinance is on the largest, most impactful developments, but also to manage staffing needs and resources required to manage and enforce a new ordinance. Staff recommends using a 3-tiered approach where tier 0, the smallest projects, would be exempt. Tier 1 projects would have required TDM plans and annual financial guarantees paid by the property owner, but would not have targets or ongoing monitoring. Tier 2, the largest projects, would have vehicle trip generation targets based on land use, location, and size, annual and remedial financial guarantees, as well as an ongoing compliance monitoring process. Site review is automatically triggered by size threshold, ensuring that large developments would be subject to the ordinance. Besides those smallest tier 0 projects, staff is recommending some other exemptions, including zones which already have trip reduction ordinances. That would be MU4, RH6, and RH7, which originally found in the Boulder Junction area. And then also to help meet the city's affordable housing goals, recommending either fully or partially exempting 100% affordable housing. Next slide, please. Staff has recommended using Denver's 3-tiered system as a starting point and then adjusting those thresholds for the Boulder environment and to manage those staff resource needs. This chart here shows Denver's size thresholds for different types of land uses, and we've also added estimated employee and residents based on assumptions of square foot per employee and residents per unit. The last column shows how many projects in each threshold level are currently in the site review pipeline. Projects that are in the pipeline generally have an age of 1 to 3 years, because that's how long it takes to get through that process and from construction to occupation. Next slide, please. So initial input from boards and council in the fall of 2024 indicated that the purpose of the ordinance should not only be to mitigate the impacts of new development and to provide multimodal infrastructure and access, but to really use this TDM plan ordinance to provide an ongoing contribution toward meeting city goals and transportation and climate goals. In developing a TDM plan ordinance, there's really 2 key challenges to overcome that we learned through our best practice reports. One is having a development requirement that's on the property owner, but knowing that TDM plans are implemented by the tenants for their employees or residents. Also knowing too that TDM programs, strategies, and services have ongoing annual costs. Things like the EcoPass, which is our most effective tool in changing travel behavior, annual costs, same thing with van pool subsidies or parking cash out programs. So based on best practices and borrowing from a lot of municipalities in Virginia, actually, the overall approach centers on expanding the city's current use of financial guarantees for those tier 1 and 2 tier projects, in that annual financial guarantees would be put in place by the developer or the owner. That would provide ongoing annual funding that is used by tenants or property managers to implement those approved TDM plans. Then there would be remedial funding for the highest tier, tier 2, and those funds are used to augment annual financial guarantees if the property is not meeting its vehicle trip generation target and is out of compliance. Initial financial guarantee rates would be based on size, like the estimated number of employees or the number of residential units, and the estimated cost of TDM plan elements. This approach and the use of financial guarantees provides the mechanism for property owners to pay for the annual cost of TDM programs that are implemented by their employee tenants or residential property managers. Of course, this does equate to a new ongoing cost to property owners of our largest developments, but we have to remember that the removal of minimum parking requirements equates to significant cost savings related to the construction and maintenance of parking spaces. That those funds, those savings could then be used towards these required TDM plans. As the House bill made mention of, the estimated cost of building a single structured parking space is $28,000. And then on top of that are, of course, ongoing maintenance costs. So significant cost savings in reducing the number of parking spaces. Next slide, please. So to summarize, staff is recommending that the city use a financial guarantee model, really continuing our use, expanding our current use of a financial guarantee model to fund ongoing annual TDM programs, and also a tiered approach to focus our requirements on the largest developments and to manage staff costs and resources. We are also recommending some exemptions to the ordinance, namely the smallest projects that would meet the tier 0 thresholds or be below them, and land uses with current TDM ordinances, and either a full or partial exemption for 100% affordable housing. Based on council's input tonight and our overall policy direction, staff will continue working on the details with input through a stakeholder engagement process. This would include details on the specific thresholds and triggers of those tiers, the vehicle trip generation targets and the evaluation methodologies to measure those trip generation targets, financial guarantee rates, which would be based on land use size and location, which TDM plan elements would be required in our process, and finally, the monitoring process and compliance requirements. And with that, it concludes my section. I will pass it on to Sam. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. And good evening, Council. Sam Bromberg from Community Vitality here to present on the on-street parking management strategies. If you'll recall from last August, we have two main focus areas for this work. One is to enhance the effectiveness of the existing neighborhood parking permit program and address the evolving needs of Boulder's existing residential and mixed-use neighborhoods. And the second area of focus is recommendations for new and redeveloped areas in response to the possibility of elimination of parking minimums. Council will also recall a recent IP with the annual update on the NPP program. We are holding off on recommending changes until after the completion of this project so that we might be able to incorporate this work into future review and changes. On to best practices. To enhance our on-street parking policies, we analyze strategies from 8 cities that have successfully reduced or eliminated parking minimums. Several cities, including Portland and Costa Mesa, limit residential parking permits to 1 per licensed driver. This reduces excess demand while providing a fair solution for residents who are reliant on their vehicles. Columbus pairs paid parking with residential permits in high demand neighborhoods, an approach that manages non-residential parking needs near schools and commercial districts while ensuring availability for residents. Eugene and Denver implement stricter residency requirements for parking permits. In Eugene, long-term residents benefit from lower annual rates, while short-term residents pay higher quarterly fees, a strategy that discourages students living off campus from bringing their vehicles with them. Similarly, Denver requires both the matching address on the vehicle registration and the driver's license to qualify for a permit, ensuring that only long-term residents are eligible for permits. Berkeley, Denver, and Estes Park have both neighborhood and building-specific restrictions. Berkeley ensures residential permit programs are only implemented in areas where more than half of the block is residential in use, while Denver excludes large multi-unit buildings from eligibility when on-street parking spaces are insufficient. Both Denver and Estes Park limit permit issuance based on a household's off-street parking availability, ensuring that private parking is utilized first before on-street parking. Finally, Seattle enforces a stricter visitor parking policy, allowing just one visitor per household. This prevents misuse and preserves street parking for residents and other users. Next slide, please. The following are recommendations to enhance the effectiveness of the existing NPP program and to address the evolving needs of Boulder's neighborhoods. They include evaluating and adapting policies for non-residential parking in NPP zones, particularly near schools, commercial areas, and other high-demand zones. This could include replacing the 2 or 3 hour time limits for non-permit holders with paid parking, as Columbus does. Collaborate with Boulder Valley School District to formalize park and walk zones around schools and highly trafficked areas. Consider reducing the number of guest and visitor permits available in overcrowded NPP zones and consolidating them into a simplified system, which ensures availability for residents while addressing the misuse of those permits. Consider limiting NPP permits to 1 per eligible resident to reduce excess vehicle storage and align parking permits with actual need. And also implementing an escalating rate structure for households requesting multiple permits. Establish a TDM wallet for NPP residents by working with vendors to develop a program framework to encourage the use of alternative transportation options. And consider further limiting the availability of residential and visitor permits on mixed-use blocks or for mixed-use buildings to ensure that curbside access in mixed-use areas balances residential needs with those of businesses, visitors, and employees of the area. Next slide, please. The following are recommendations for new and redeveloped areas, and they include limiting new NPP zones to areas significantly impacted by commercial activities, schools, or recreational facilities, so limiting the spread of new zones, and developing thresholds for when a new NPP is proposed for an area impacted by new or redevelopment based on utilization data and anticipated new trip generation. And that concludes my section. Thank you.
All right, so three complex topics all brought together in this nice graphic. These are all the different recommendations that we have for each topic. And as you would have read in your memo, we have 3 questions that we've laid out for you. Essentially, we're looking for your feedback on the recommendations related to off-street parking, TDM, and on-street parking. There's a lot more words on this, but if it's helpful, let me know and I can bring this slide back up, but otherwise I will stop sharing and we can take questions.
Okay, that was a great presentation. I appreciate the clarity and thank you very much for all the effort put into it. Who would like to start us out with the first question? Tara, then Ryan?
You know what? Let Ryan go first.
Ryan, then Tara, then Aaron?
Thanks, Tara. Tina, I have a question. Should we start with our questions?
So we're doing the first question. Well, yes, let's start with questions.
I have a clarification question regarding what we've heard. Is that okay to start with?
Yep.
Great. Okay. I just have a follow-up question about the hotline message that I sent. So just so people know, I asked about bike parking and if there might be scope to address property owners who we did not ask to meet the standard after 2013, which is when our new modern standard came in. And my question was, through some combination of requirements, incentives, or education, do we have scope to address them now? And Lisa, you responded to say, not right now, and I totally understand that. So my question is, Lisa, you had said if council would like to suggest future work in this space, let us know. So my question to you is, do you want to know about that today, or I guess on things that are maybe outside of your immediate scope, should we just sort of keep a lid on that for now, or would you like to hear that today?
I think it's always helpful to hear feedback. I don't know, I know there's some rules related to like immediate future work that has to get not of certain number, but I think we've also taken feedback from Transportation Advisory Board and Planning Board about like what future topics they'd like us to look at for lots of different projects that we've brought to them. So I think we can note it for the future. If you want to more officially make a recommendation or direction towards staff, I would look to probably Teresa to give detail on how that would happen.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for that. And thank you for your articulate and clear response to my hotline. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Hey, Tara?
Well, good, because I will colloquy on, I love that word. I used to not like it, but I truly love that one. So I've been thinking about Ryan's hotline, and I've been thinking about older developments. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that gets pained whenever they see, for instance, at Basemar, a parking lot that has barely any cars in it. So I'm wondering if we could add to the discussion we're going to have, and I agree with Ryan that we should have it sooner rather than later, is there anything we can do to reimagine those spaces? For instance, even with right now it's like the opposite of everything we stand for, trees, or even if it's small spaces, more bike parking and stuff like that. I think I would love to see that added, just what to do about these older parking lots. The second thing I wanted to ask you was, or mention to that, was, just give me 1 second. I want to agree with Ryan that we should be discussing this sooner rather than later. So Ryan, I give you a A+ in that comment. And even though it was out of scope, I'm really excited for it to be in scope as soon as possible. I guess I want to say about the secure bike parking and the better bike structures that can fit the cargo bikes, etc., is I feel like these are two super important things for us to get anywhere with some of our goals. And I'm worried that if we only do anything with new not with, give me that word, everybody, new
Development.
yeah, that's it, developments. And that we're really going to be missing so many of our old developments, which could use a real makeover. So I'm wondering if there's any way that we could think outside of the box as to how to affect the older develops and the older parking, the older shopping, the strip malls for the future. I think that could be something, I wish we could do that. I don't know if it's possible. It's just such a big wish of mine. So, and lastly, this has nothing to do with Ryan now. I don't understand. I have one question. Why does limiting NPP zones, why is that an important thing? Because my big fear is for seniors right now. I just want to make sure that we're paying attention to our seniors, which is our largest growing group, that they have a way to, for those that have to drive and those that are disabled, I would wish that they would have opportunities to be very close to their house. So
Okay, and Tara, we're
Yeah.
technically not on NPP yet. That's
we're not?
question
Okay.
number 3.
Okay, I'll do that.
But
Thanks, Tina, for keeping me in line.
Anytime.
And I can take your, the two questions that you had on the parking, I can answer. So you asked about, or you noted what can we do with existing developments? And I do want to clarify that when properties come in with major alterations or need building permits, we can implement the new regulations. It's just when they're not doing anything that we can't, we're saying that that's not within scope to create kind of a retroactive or a new type of requirement when they're not requesting some type of permit. So we see lots of redevelopment and changes happen to properties that are brought in for building permits where we're able to look at that bike parking and make sure that it's meeting the number and design and things like that. But I do think there's, as we've discussed and it's been brought up, obviously there is a lot of interest in this, and we're interested in it as well, just as a future work project.
So putting that on retro, I love that word. That's the word, retroactive.
Yeah, and then your other question was what can we do with older parking lots? And what came to mind immediately was that we're in our comprehensive planning process. And so there's lots of opportunity to envision if we do open up space, because those parking spaces technically are required by the city right now. So if we don't have minimum parking requirements, there's so much more flexibility for land like that to develop into other uses. And so I think that could be an important part of the conversation for the comprehensive plan.
And I'd like to call on Teresa, whose hand just popped up for a minute.
Thanks, Tina. I do want to remind council that it's, while it is certainly helpful for us to have a preview of what folks may or may not be interested in, that would require a trade-offs conversation. And so something would have to come off the plate for something new to come on the plate. And so just want to make sure that you're aware of that as you're having these conversations. And then also it would require a formal process down the road of a nod of 5.
So thanks, Teresa. And that's a good reminder to me that we're going to try to stay in scope, but we will also find time, I'm sure, as a council to address some of the other thoughts we have surrounding this issue. So I think the next person was Aaron.
I have 2 clarifying questions, but they're on TDM. Are we strictly on parking requirements right now?
You know, let's do clarifying questions for all of it now, and then we'll go through the do we support questions.
Okay.
Does that sound good with everybody? Great, thanks.
All right, thanks. So my couple questions on the TDM side. One of them was for the tiers. Part of that we're hooking it onto whether a project needs site review, needs to go through the site review process. But my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that because of the transit-oriented communities bill, we're going to have to pretty significantly overhaul the site review process over the next couple of years. So I think it requires less discretionary review. So I'm just wondering if you all are factoring that feature into this plan, or would we need to revisit how the thresholds were hit if we do need to change the site review threshold significantly?
Well, I think, you know, regardless of the site review requirements, we can set the tier thresholds at levels that we deem appropriate. So when a project comes in, if it meets the threshold, then it would be under the ordinance. You know, I'm not sure that site review requirements would supersede that, but that may be, you know, a question for our city attorneys.
Right, well, maybe I'll just offer a quick thought on that since we're talking about it, is to, as you write the ordinance, you may want to specify specific sizes rather than just say if it goes through site review to future proof.
Yes.
That's a thought.
Agreed.
Great. And then my other question was about the tiers for the TDM requirements. And just something that jumped out at me was the difference in the square footage between office and industrial. And I know that industrial definitely has more square feet per employee, but by my rough math, the per square footage for industrial was 3 times office, but the tier was actually 6 times the size of the tier for office. So I was wondering why that discrepancy.
Well, those tiers, those are the Denver tiers. We're just kind of using those as a starting point, and then we can adjust them, you know, as needed to focus on the the number of projects in each tier we want to have go through that ordinance in any given year, and then also to manage the staffing requirements to do that. So I think those are all things adjustables. What we were showing is just an example of the Denver tiered system, and the employees. Or the square foot per employees, those are just averages that come from like the Institute of Traffic Engineers. They are averages. Many of them have significant ranges within them. So, but those are all things that we can adjust to make it fit right for our Boulder environment.
Great. Thanks for explaining that. I thought it was the starting point for our tiers, not just the starting point for analysis. Okay.
Yes.
Great. Thanks for those answers. That's all I've got.
Okay, for more clarifying questions, I think Matt is next.
Thanks. Well, I'm going to maybe piggyback a little bit on clarifying where Aaron was at. And it was based off a note on one of the slides that basically said the current TDM process, most TDM strategies cannot be implemented by the developer. And could you clarify maybe a little bit as to why we aren't seeing that? Because it seems like if we've got this process and providing this great strategies and stuff, we're not getting that implementation. So I just wondering if you could sort of help me understand why we're not seeing that.
Sure. So, when you think about traditional TDM programs, like a parking cash out program, van pool subsidies, all those types of things, those are things that are implemented by employers for their employees, paid for by employers for their employees. Usually when we're going through a site review process and we're looking at a developer, a lot of times if it's a multi-tenant commercial building, we don't even know who the tenants are. We don't know anything about the tenants. Sometimes there are national corporations that come in who have policies. I remember when Apple came into 29th Street, we wanted to put an EcoPass requirement on them, and they say we do not provide any benefits that we cannot provide to all of our employees nationwide. And they were like, no, we're not going to do that. So there are just limitations on what a developer can do during that development process. All of the real traditional TDM programs that we know, they are implemented at the employer level or residentially at the property manager level. And I think sometimes it really takes knowing who those tenants are to understand which TDM programs and services or incentives or disincentives will work with that specific group. And so, we have had success in requiring EcoPasses. Those have a set cost. We've been able to do that through financial guarantees. But a lot of the other TDM programs, it's really hard to think about what a developer can do when it's really the future tenant, maybe 3 years down the line, who is going to implement a TDM program for their employees.
And good evening, Council. I'm Brad Mueller, Director of Planning and Development Services. Just to add on to Chris's comments, and a reminder, the developer of a property may not be the entity that ends up owning it. So there are plenty of developers who develop and then turn over and don't manage the actual building. And that kind of feeds then into the scenario that Chris is talking about.
Okay. I mean, so this really kind of begs a question here. We go through a process that has no teeth to it. So I'm wondering, like, one, this either stays an exercise of futility, or we modify this so that it actually has some binding power. And so I'm kind of wondering if where we are in this current process of thinking about TDM, in whether we just throw our hands up and go, some do it, most don't, or do we go another direction? We say, maybe we start thinking about binding requirements to say, we've gone through this work. This is part of how our community wants to see this happen. And therefore, doesn't matter if you're the developer and you're the employer or you're hiring someone, the TDM stays with the property without ownership, and that's the requirement. And if you're moving in knowing you got a requirement, you got to meet that. So I just feel that, like, even at a high level, we're getting in the weeds and we haven't answered the big question of how do we gain more efficacy out of the TDM work that we are hanging a lot of hope on and putting a lot of work in to meet community needs. So that's a bigger question, but I'm really struggling with how do we gain more efficacy.
So I can answer that. So, I mean, the approach that we're recommending is approach that where the property owner that could be the developer initially, but then the property owner, they are putting up an annual financial guarantee. That is funding that goes into an escrow account, and then that funding is distributed to whoever the tenants are so that they can implement the TDM programs. So if we have requirements that there are eco passes or a parking cash out program or van pool subsidies, the money from those annual financial guarantees are put in place by the property owner. It is attached to a requirement for that property. And then that funding is used, it's dispersed to the tenants, and then the tenants use that to fund the TDM program of their approved TDM plan. And so their employees or the residents get the benefits of the eco passes, the van pool subsidies. So this is, you know, really based on some models that we've seen in Fairfax and Arlington, where they've been using these annual financial guarantees. Because as I said, the key thing in a TDM ordinance is that TDM programs have ongoing annual costs. They never end. It's in perpetuity. And so what we're recommending is that annual financial guarantee approach that puts the money from the property owner dispersed to the tenant, who then has the funds to pay for the TDM programs and services in their approved TDM plan. For the largest developments, that's why they also have that remedial fund, because if you're not meeting your trip generation goal, you take a portion from that remedial fund to augment the annual fund. That provides more money for different programs, new programs, innovative programs, different incentives that could then see, okay, we put those in place. Now are they in compliance? And so that's the system that they set up. I think it's a really good approach. I'd like to model that approach there. So that's the mechanism we're looking at. So hopefully that explains it.
It does a little bit. I have a couple more questions, so maybe we can sink into this a little later or at a different time. But anyway, getting at where are the teeth to make sure that this TDM stuff has staying power is key. And so it sounds like some financial incentives may go there. Staying on maybe just a little track of the TDM, and then I have one follow-up question, or one different question after that about EV charging, and just piggybacking on Aaron's point, with the new state law, does TDM now that we're doing with transit-oriented communities effectively front load all planning and permitting? And so I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
is that how this effectively works? Maybe it's called something different, but I'm just wondering, does the TDM now shift to a different phase of the process, given that we're basically doing TOC work now for so much of the city?
Yeah, again, Brad Mueller with planning. I'm going to invite Carl Geiler to speak to that since he worked closely with it. I'm sure Lisa can follow up. I do want to just add a little more detail to the comments Chris made about the financial fee, and just clarify that it wouldn't be an incentive. It would be a requirement of that property that would run in perpetuity and essentially fund either the TDM requirements or ensure the funding of it. And again, that way in year 25, because it's in perpetuity, as Chris notes, when the developer is long gone, the current tenant is the one that's paying the surety essentially to make sure those programs are met. And we would have enforcement mechanisms if they're not meeting that. So I just wanted to clarify that a little bit. But Carl and Lisa, can you kind of speak to the TDM piece or the TOC piece?
There's a number of state bills that impact, multimodal corridors. So the one is the parking bill that we're talking about tonight that does not require parking for projects on certain corridors. There's also the transit-oriented community bill, which basically requires a number of units to be built along multimodal corridors in those areas. It doesn't speak necessarily to transportation demand management plans other than parking is not required. So I think in the sense of front loading, I think it does make property owners or developers look at other methods to try to address that parking demand and deal with access. There are some best practices that the state is releasing that accompany the parking bill, but nothing specific in the bills about TDM.
I appreciate that. Maybe we flag that for our later conversation on the state bills. My last question has to do with EV parking. I'm just sort of curious. I know that we're sort of like, hey, we're just going to leave it as is. My question is, how do we find ways, especially for neighborhood centers, to gain EV infrastructure if they're not either having a new build or redeveloping, which seem to be the only two triggers for EV infrastructure? So are there intermediate ways, like we do with energy code updates, to say, even if you're not scraping a house and you're doing a small remodel, you still got to then do the updates to get us up to code as a community? And so I'm wondering, how do we have any intermediate way with EV charging? Like, I'm thinking Table Mesa Shopping Center, I'm thinking Baseline and Foothills, I'm thinking Whole Foods, I'm thinking the REI area. Like, those areas aren't redeveloping within the next decade. So then are we just having EV charging deserts until a redevelopment? So I'm trying to wonder, how do we get to the EV charging infrastructure faster while not having to wait for a redevelopment?
Yeah, I think that's something, it obviously wasn't part of the scope back in 2014 to think through EV charging, but I think that there's a lot of opportunity in a future project. Obviously, we have this deadline with the state bill, but there's a lot of opportunities to think of other ways other than requirements. Also, maybe it's more of incentives and working with businesses. Maybe it's something that our climate initiatives department or community vitality works on. That's more of how do we support and incentivize businesses in wanting to provide that infrastructure more than the regulatory side of forcing them to. Not to say that there's not a place for both of them, but kind of a larger picture of thinking of how do we get that infrastructure, I think, is a question that would be interesting to answer, again, in a separate work project.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, next we have Mark, then Taisha and Tara.
Okay, I want to start by seconding my colleague's view that if you're going to do this, it's got to have some efficacy to it. And the financial obligations probably have to run with the property. Otherwise, I don't know why you're doing it. But my question is, how large are the contemplated 3 to 5 year guarantees? Exactly what kind of a burden are we placing upon the property and obviously the property owners?
So the 3 to 5 year guarantee is what we're currently doing. We have a very limited amount of time that we're requiring things like the EcoPass. The new approach in a new ordinance would make that the annual financial guarantees annual and ongoing to continually pay for those requirements. So if we have a developer come in and build a large development and we say, we think we're going to require that you provide EcoPasses, B-cycle memberships, and whatever else, then we estimate what that financial guarantee is. And that becomes an annual financial requirement from that property owner and then those funds are used by the tenants of that property, whether it be employers or it could be a property management for a residential, and they would use that annual financial guarantee funding to implement the programs that we're requiring. So that's the thing. And it would go on in perpetuity because all TDM programs, the traditional ones, the ones that are the most effective, they have annual costs. So we are moving from a limited financial guarantee situation, which we have now, where we only require it for 3 to 5 years, to one where it is an annual ongoing financial guarantee, if that explains it.
And have we costed out what that annual guarantee will look like for a large project, for a large industrial project? What is the burden that we're looking to impose upon property owners?
So, I mean, you could estimate it in different ways. So like one example may be if you could do it by a per employee estimate, EcoPasses may be, roughly depending on your size and location of your business, about $120 per year. So if we were to say have an EcoPass requirement, we would look at, okay, what is the estimated number of employees times the 120, and that would be the cost. I think the important thing to know is when a developer can build less parking, with the average cost being, $28,000 for a structured spot, that would buy EcoPasses for over 200 units. So if you had a 50 unit, development, eliminating one parking spot could pay for 4 years of EcoPasses for that. So that's the trade-off we're looking at, is the developer can provide less parking, but that savings, some of that, a portion of that needs to be reinvested in this ongoing TDM program. That's what we heard in terms of having a TDM ordinance that has an impact. And the way it has an impact is by providing these programs that do have annual costs.
Okay, just a couple of other questions. On page 14 of the memo, the three-tier approach for TDM management, it looks as if only 10 projects seem to be outside of tier 0. And there's some reference in there to requiring more FTEs to manage the program. Why, with only 10 programs falling outside of the tier 0 exemption, why would we need more FTEs to do this?
Well, I think it'd accumulate over time. If every year you had, a handful of tier 1 projects and, a couple tier 2, year 2, you're doubling that and so on, so on. So after 10 years, you've got a number of projects that need to be monitored and make sure those financial guarantees are put in place, so we can, look at, what would be the added staffing that would be needed over time as the number of projects that you're monitoring for this ordinance occur. So, but again, looking at those thresholds, we can help manage, the extent of that need. We can really focus only on the largest. Maybe we only have, one, tier 2 project every couple years, something like a CU South. So that's part of the management. But I think, when you think about everything that goes into the ordinance, you've got the planning and development services engineers that are reviewing plans. You've got transportation and mobility staff approving the TDM plans for the tenants. You've got our financial people in our budget office that are managing the financial guarantee. So there's many different levels to that. So we anticipate, depending on where we put that threshold, we may need some additional staffing.
Fair enough. And I have one last question. We had some mode share objectives in the 2019 Master Transportation Plan, which was 80% walking, biking, and transit for residents and 40% for non-residents. How did we do?
So we conducted our latest resident travel diary in 2023, and that report came out in 2024. The measurable objective you're referring to is related to reducing single occupancy travel for all trips by residents to just 20%. We are at around, I believe, 35% of resident trips are in SOVs. That has come down from the mid-40s when we started measuring. So we are making progress in the decline, but we are not making progress at the trajectory we need to meet our goal. But we are making progress and reducing SOV trips.
How are we doing for the non-residents?
The non-resident, so we look at non-resident employees. So we did our last Boulder Valley employee survey in 2022. These are all available online as well. This has been the harder nut to crack. When you look at the non-resident employees who are coming in, about 80% travel in single occupant vehicles. Since we started measuring that, we've only had one statistically significant drop in that SOV mode share, and that was in 2008. So time of the financial crisis and high gas prices. But in some ways, we're fighting an uphill battle. More and more of our employees are non-residents, and each year they're traveling further and further away to get to their work in Boulder, and oftentimes outside of the RTD service area. As we look at residential patterns more north and east. So maybe holding ground, we're doing okay, but that is a measure that we haven't really been able to knock.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for a very, very clear presentation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, more questions from Taisha and then Lauren.
Thank you very much. I just had just a couple of questions. The first is really just universal, and that's a question around the fiscal note. We've had several, just in the comments this evening, there have been a couple of moments where finances, whether that be on staffing or technical. And so again, very eager for fiscal notes and just the fiscal implications to any decisions that we're making, especially since we have a tight budget, we have restricted funds, we need to know what's restricted, what's not, and the implications to the budget. So I'm just going to continue to ask for it until we see it. And I know that the team is working on it, but again and again, decisions are being made and we're giving direction without having financial information to guide that. And it just feels irresponsible. The second question I have, so just a status update on when we can get that, because last time I inquired about this, I was told that it would be it would happen after the budgeting process, which we have completed, and we're about to go into another budgeting process. So my concern is that we would have to wait another year. So we'd love to get it.
I'm happy to give you an update. We just met on it this morning.
Okay.
We intend to implement the fiscal note and associated staff training and guidance in our agenda management software transition. So the first sort of formal update to the memo template, including the fiscal note, will take effect following your summer break this year. But our staff has multiple great examples of other local governments that are making use of this. And it's a change process like any other. So we are
right. Okay. Obviously, I have significant concerns about waiting to the summer for getting financial information that guide our to guide our decisions. So I'm hopeful that we can find a stopgap in the interim to inform the decision, the financial decisions that we make with every decision that we have. Another question. So thank you, Pam. I appreciate and understand, but again, it just feels that in the political, economic, environmental climate that we're in, we need to have that financial information and the trade-offs to help us better understand the trade-offs of decisions that we make. My second question is around impacted outreach. I noticed that residents and staff were going to be invited for that, and I was just curious if commuters were also going to be a part of that primary targeted. So that's my second question. And I just have one more after that.
Yeah, I think that we're hoping to get the kind of initial recommendations and options that are before you tonight confirmed, and then we're going to finalize our community engagement plan. The engagement of commuters or folks who don't live in Boulder is more challenging, but we have a lot of great engagement staff and ideas on how to get that voice heard. So that will definitely be a part of it.
Awesome. And again, I'm just speaking specifically to the 2 bullet points around the primary engagement that was in the memo and the need to also include the commuters as a primary. So I'm happy to know that that's already on your radar screen. And then lastly, the low income subsidies, it would be helpful just to know the threshold for that subsidies. And actually, I'm sorry, there are 4. Just in general, it would be helpful to have outcome data on the work that we've been doing to date. So I know some information was shared about that, but again, it would be very helpful to have access to as much outcome data on the policies that we've already implemented and how they've driven us towards our goals or not. So thank you so much. And I look forward to the responses.
Okay, Lauren.
I'm sorry, I have the response. I don't believe anybody responded to my low threshold. It's okay.
I'm sorry. That's
all right.
I think that one might be me, but someone please correct me if I'm wrong. In terms of the discounted, we offer discounted residential permits for low income or income qualified residents. And the way that we've implemented it to make it, feasible for our staff to grant these and easy for the public as well to apply for them is they just need to attest to the fact that they're enrolled in another program. So that might be, SNAP benefits, or, they might have Colorado First healthcare. So they self-attest to the fact that they're enrolled in one of those other programs. There's City of Boulder programs, and then there's county programs. And then we issue them the discount. It is half off of the residential permits. This year, the residential permits are about $51.50 for a calendar year. So half off is like just over $25. And we do see that there are folks, utilizing the program, but I don't have numbers for you tonight, so I can certainly come back next time and present on, you know, just how many people are taking advantage of that option.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Okay, now Lauren, my apologies for that, Taisha.
Thanks, Tina. And thank you everyone for such great comments. I find myself kind of drawn to that, particularly related to bike parking, maybe some retroactive measures, and would be interested in a future discussion. I know that's not part of this item, but kind of thinking about what that might look like. And I appreciated Tara's question around what we kind of do with older bike parking lot, what we do with older parking lots, and look forward to that discussion as part of the comp planning. And Aaron's thing about TDM related to thresholds based on size. We're kind of getting into this really intense conversation about how some of these, like the financial guarantees around TDM over time, and I really like the direction that staff is going with that. I have concerns around, you know, inflation and programs, you know, RTD could drastically change the cost of permits and things like that. And it's not necessarily that I need you to answer this question now, but I would hope that when this comes back, I would like a little bit more information about kind of how, you know, if a tenant moves in who has twice as many employees as we're expecting, or half as many, kind of how those programs will work and evolve. Thank you.
Okay, I'll call on myself and then, oh, actually, are we waiting for response for yours, Lauren, or is that to be addressed in the next
No,
round?
I said they could address it in
Yeah.
the future. It's sort of too specific for where we're at right now, I think.
Perfect. I'll call on myself and then Tara. I had two specific questions. The first, as I had emailed Brad earlier, I'm just wondering if this ordinance would describe whether it's okay to charge a car on-street parking from your home running a cord across the sidewalk. I'm just thinking about as people might switch their garages into ADUs, but still want to have an EV. Are there different ways of charging? And is that okay if they put a mat down so they don't trip over the cord? And for what it's worth, this is already happening in neighborhoods, so.
Yeah, I'm happy to address that, council member. There's a couple different ways to answer that. The short answer is it's illegal to do that already under a number of highly bureaucratic and technical interpretations of things. As you can appreciate, this is not a high priority for, in this case, code enforcement and police. If there was a complaint, we would certainly follow up, but we don't do proactive enforcement on that. I think the larger theme that's important in your question is, if this becomes a standard practice, what will be a more broad approach to that? And it gets into, you know, a difficult but maybe important scenario of providing on-street electrical service up and down streets. So it's an important thing for us to keep an eye out. I do not know that we envision needing to put anything in this ordinance or being able to address what is kind of an emerging problem, but it's an important thing to put on the radar, and appreciate that. Lisa, I don't know if you've got anything to add this time on that.
Just that there's a few cities that do allow the on-street EV charging with a cord, but there's very specific like ADA requirements that you need to have that go over the cord, because it is a safety hazard to have a cord going over a sidewalk. Or there's like Vancouver has some system where you can have it like 8 feet above the sidewalk and then the cord goes over. So some cities have piloted this. So if it's something to look into with a future work program item, but like Brad said, currently right now it's illegal because it's a safety hazard.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question is just a follow-up with what Mark was asking about single occupancy vehicles for residents. Does the reduction in single occupancy vehicles take into account the changes in the demographics of our population, sort of an increased percentage of students and an increased percentage of people who are retired? Because I think people with children and younger people tend to drive more than students and retirees.
Mhm. Yeah, so when we do our surveys, and we've been doing our resident travel diary survey since 1990. So we've done it, and we do it now every 3 years. And we use a third-party consultant that uses a statistically significant sampling process and weighting process to match kind of the survey results that we get in with the demographics that are reported in things like the census and other things, so that there is weighting of the response to match our current demographic situation.
Okay, thank you. All right, Tara, you have another burning question before we?
Yes.
Okay.
I noticed we didn't have any questions about NPPs. Is that for a different section
No,
tonight?
we're doing all questions, and then we're just going to go through with the do you support questions.
Okay, so can somebody explain on staff why we would limit NPP zones at all? I'm just thinking about people, families with children and seniors, which they both need NPPs.
Right. It's not about limiting the existing NPPs. It's about focusing our energy and resources for new zones to those areas that are influenced by outside parking pressures. If that makes sense.
No, it doesn't. I'm
It's
asking.
it's about implementing if there's a request for a new zone, it would only be for a new zone that's near an area that has commercial activity, school activity, or some other activity that brings in additional outside folks into the neighborhood, as opposed to
Got it.
yeah, just a neighborhood that has no outside pressures, and maybe a resident doesn't want one of their other neighbors parking in front of their house.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Samantha.
Sure.
Okay, so then, and Aaron, if you want to chime in and help me out, I was thinking we might want to just do a straw poll for each of the questions. Thank you. The first one is, does council support staff recommendation related to maximum parking requirements, bicycle parking, shared parking, and electric vehicle charging? So I guess, do we want to start with some comments and then we'll try to do a straw poll? Ryan?
Sorry, yeah, I had a few comments to go along with my stuff. So sorry to interrupt you. You're just addressing that. I thought you were doing a straw poll, so I wanted to comment if that's what you're doing, but I'll stand by.
Let's do comments first. It's going to take a while, so we might want to keep it brief. So, okay, Ryan.
Thanks. I mostly want to just appreciate all of the immense work and care that's gone into this by so many staff over the years, and also this is a really big memo with so many things in it, and subcontractors, Alta, Fox and Tuttle, and others. And I just wanted to say thank you for everybody for this work, and also that it's such an exciting time to be making these kind of improvements for our community. So I'm generally supportive of everything, but I did have just a couple of enhancements suggestions. So just briefly, on parking minimums, thanks Lisa for confirming the direction is to universally eliminate them. I did want to ask if we could explore, I think Tara talked about this, but just explore making sure that existing structures could benefit from that new liberty to use parking. So they're I don't know how to do it exactly, but just as a principle that we would explore, making it so that a property owner that has a parking lot could now use that, either to make a little coffee shop or whatever. I'm sure there'd be a million considerations, but just as a principle, I'd love to see that if we could fit that in the scope. If not, I understand. And then I guess I'll just go quickly to bike parking. So thanks, Lisa, for your response on everything. I totally understand, not in current scope to look at the pre-modern standard and improving that, but I would certainly be supportive of. I think that's a really important and exciting area of policy. So I would be look to a time when council and staff can help with something to move something like that forward. The other thing about parking I wanted to mention, and it might be also in the future, but this seems really fundamental, so I'll raise it now. And it's that as we move from this kind of older parking, sort of thinking about parking, into a more modern, holistic, multimodal one, I would love it and think it would be very powerful if we had some kind of a parking demand model for bike parking, something that could tell the many departments around the city, the service providers, the community advocates who, in various ways are trying to help with bike parking, that they could see a central, kind of an analysis of across our 26 square miles, thousands of buildings, dozens of intercity transit stops. What is the network that we're trying to build from a demand standpoint? This might be for later, but I just wanted to raise it now because if it could be used to design this part of the bike parking standard, maybe this would be a nice time to think about it. So that's what I have for bike parking. Otherwise, I'm very supportive of everything in the memo. And then finally on EVs, yeah, I'm fine with it as is. However, if I had my druthers, I would have us pricing, giving either a preferential pricing to lightweight EVs, including and especially neighborhood electric vehicles, and or a higher price to heavier vehicles. That is not a judgment, but that is a cost allocation to the impacts that those types of vehicles, cause towards potholes and other issues. So I don't know if we have time or space for that, but I would think that would be exciting. That's it for this one. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments on this one before we do a straw poll? Okay, great. Let's, for the first one, raise your hand if you generally support the staff recommendation. Okay, that looks like they've got some good support, but we'll be hearing more when staff comes back and has done their engagement. For the second one, that is about the TDM ordinance. Any comments before we go to a straw poll? Matt? You want to start, Matt? Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Gina. I'm going to circle back to that inquiry about, and I appreciate Chris focusing on the financial stuff. I still think the language in this modified ordinance needs stronger requirements and mandates for the TDM to really be staying with the property and anchor forward. I'd hate for a tenant to feel like they can sort of say, like you mentioned with Apple, say, no, thanks. That to me isn't viable. And then they need to find somewhere else to be or a different building or what have you. If you want to come into our city, then you got to meet with our values. And if you don't, then maybe this isn't the place for you, right? And I think that there's something to be said, especially with regards to our transit goals, that it's important that we hold people to that requirement. So however you feel is appropriate to add even further language of requirement and teeth, I think would be an important one for us to pursue. It shouldn't require too much work to add more stringent, as we've learned from our city attorney, shall versus may is quite a different phrasing. And so would love for us to explore more stringent requirement on that front.
Okay, Ryan and then Tara. And let's try
Thanks.
to keep our
Also,
comments brief.
Thanks. Also supportive of this. Just two thoughts. And again, I guess take it or leave it for this scope. But first, very thorough assessment of peers and really impressed and love where you're going. I would just ask to consider exploring, is there a way to also incorporate a data and learning feedback loop in this process, such that as we have applicants proposed TDM requirements, that when we get to the monitoring part, that monitoring includes asking the users, like, how's it going? Do you have any improvement opportunities? Such that would then come back to both the developer or the property owner, for some kind of iteration, and then ideally into more to the city too, so that we could create more of a data-driven learning process. So again, take it or leave it for this round, but to me that seems exciting. And then the second one is, just to pick up on, I think Chris, in one of your slides, you just spoke to some of the limitations of a developer-focused standard. I think this is crucial and very important where we're going. If and when there's future time, I would also love to look at opportunities beyond TDM, that is beyond that which is pinned to developers. Specifically, I think we should have binding requirements for employers I also think there's probably some interesting opportunities to do wider public engagement, to tell the story to users about all the exciting multimodal enhancements we're doing, how to navigate the system, probably both at a broad level and some specific communities. So I'll leave it at that for now, and just, voice my interest if we get to a time where there's space to do that. So thanks again, Chris and team, for all your great work.
Okay, Tara, then Taisha.
I don't know much about TDM, if anything, but I at all, except what I read here. But I do want to just push back and just make mention that we've been trying to pull down costs to businesses and make things less onerous. And I just want to make sure, before we jump on any new ideas how to mandate more, that there's even like enough of a win for us to do that. I'm going to bring up that RTD just added AB2, the second bus to the airport. After how long was it closed down during COVID? So it's not like we have this extensive transportation system here that people can depend on and that is widespread. So I want to be careful that whatever we do, we don't bring back onerousness. Is there a word for being onerous that's a noun? There should be. That we don't have things become more onerous, while at the same time last week or whatever that was, we were trying to make things less onerous. So we just need enough of a, of a reason to, I would say, a big reason.
Okay, and I just want to colloquy on Tara. I would just be interested in some feedback directly from businesses, just to hear what they have to say. Taisha.
Thank you. I just wanted to support the comment on if we're going to have a policy, I would love it to matter and have teeth to it. Otherwise, what are we doing? So I echo that. I also just echo anything more with the bike and bike infrastructure. I do have some concerns just around increased costs for visitors coming in, and recognizing that our city is already cost prohibitive to live in, and we know sales tax is going down, and I think one of the considerations for free parking is that it gets people in and then they pay money other places that compensate for that free. There's nothing free, we know that. So I do have those concerns, and nothing in the documentation alleviates that concern right now. If anything, it just sets up our community to be even, more elitist. And that's not what we want. We want more socioeconomic diversity in our community. And so that's just a general, I appreciate the efforts on our commuters. I also agree with Tina on the businesses and the impacts there. And not just the businesses that are here, but also the businesses the many, many businesses that are elsewhere, but come in and work here. There was also something around the schools, and I noticed there was a real focus on parents, and I just wanted to lift up, as somebody who worked with and in schools for more than 20 years, that there's a whole ecosystem of people that are also visiting and doing work in schools to teach a class or those kinds of things. And so just thinking about the entire ecosystem of, the school setting and just the different settings that we have. And that's all I have. Thank you. Just wanted to double check. I also just wanted to lift up, although I appreciate again the reduction in emissions, I must lift up again that I'm hopeful to see more of the benefits around biodiversity restoration, which is also critical. It's mentioned briefly in the pocket parks. But I do think that there is an opportunity to increase the environmental and ecological impacts of the decisions that we're making around these topics as well. Thank you.
Okay, Mark.
I'm going to take a rather negative perspective on this. The failure of the community to meet the master transportation plan mode share objectives so egregiously tells me that our almost exclusive focus on bikes and e-scooters and public transit, which we don't really have, although we talk about it constantly, is really not addressing one of the things we ought to be addressing, which is people who ride in cars. We've defined cars to be an existential evil, and so we do nothing about that. And yet, despite our best efforts, we have neither compelled nor induced the general population to get out of their cars and ride our non-existent mass transit system or ride bikes. We have an aging population and they cannot ride our bikes, and they're not getting on scooters, and they're not picking up their groceries at Whole Foods in December or February when it's 15 degrees in their electric bikes. It's not going to happen. And so our planning processes have to acknowledge the fact that people are going to continue to drive. I hope within a few years they will primarily drive electric vehicles, which will make a big difference in our carbon footprint. But the concept that we only focus on alternative modes of transportation and not the popular mode of transportation is to me simply short-sighted. I don't think we're going to get to an 80% mode of alternative transportation. That simply beggars the imagination. And with respect to non-residents, we're at 80% who don't comply, and we're trying to get them down to 40%. I would like to see a little more realism in how we plan and how we program in this community for people who need to move from one place or another. That doesn't mean we can't discuss parking fees and neighborhood planning for neighborhood parking, but what we're doing now by and large is rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. And we are not addressing the major mode of transportation, and we're planning board members urge staff to think of the quote, significant portion of our population that does not drive. Well, I'm not sure how large that population is, but it's clearly not enough to meet our goals. And the planning board also urged the TDM ordinance to quote, stimulate travel behavior change, unquote. I think there's a reason we're not stimulating, travel behavior change, because we can't. That's not how people live, and we're not meeting people where they live in our planning processes. So that's my 2 cents on this. I know we're going to move ahead and approve all of this, but we are, as I said, rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic when we do so. Thank you.
All right, Aaron.
All right, well, I've heard enough other comments. I figured I just have to give my couple cents here. I want to say a huge thank you to staff. This has been very complicated, detailed work. And I know we've heard from council members a real desire to have requirements here. I believe you have designed this to have requirements. So I'm really glad to see that. So that having it go with the owner of the building in perpetuity for those larger projects, I think is a great approach. And so I think it does provide the kinds of requirements that we have been lacking. And so I'm really excited to see us take that step forward. And to Mark's point, we're not trying to get everybody out of their cars. I think it's about providing options. Certainly people drive, and this anticipates that a certain number of people will drive, and that's totally fine. But I will say that in some of our more recent commercial developments where I've seen some kind of more modern TDM approaches taken, I've also seen that the mode share is different in some of those projects. So I think we're not trying to, nor will we get everybody out of cars. That's fine. But I think you can make a difference in your mode choice with these measures. So I'm looking forward to putting them together. And while we do continue to hope for more improved service from RTD, we do have some bus service, so we'll keep fighting for more. but it is not non-existent. It does exist. So I certainly take it on a regular basis myself. So anyway, just a big thank you to that and for striking this balance. I think that you're on the right track.
All right, if that's the end of the comments for that section, maybe we can take a quick straw poll for generally, given the comments that we've heard, supportive of moving forward with the TDM section. Some hands. Okay. And then finally, just the piece on the strategies for on-street parking. Any initial comments or perhaps going straight to a straw poll? Oh, Ryan.
Just two things. I want to pick up and agree with Mark that we should not be trying to get rid of cars and making cars life for drivers more difficult. And in fact, I'm really excited about this on-street program. It's some of the most important work we're doing, in part because we can use pricing strategies to make parking easier. And so I just want to lift up a comment or two I've heard from, or I've seen from some emails come in that point out that there's a body of empirical work led by Donald Shoup from UCLA who shows how there's a pricing optimum where if you make the price such that you have a spot or maybe two on average open per block, you create a system where you can expect parking. And a lot of the times people think parking is terrible. It's because they can't find parking. And so we can actually create more available parking through some of these strategies. So I just wanted to lift up that idea of valuing parking and through that putting a price on it so that we can actually take care of and steward that important resource. And I'm really excited about the work Samantha and the team is doing on that. The second thing is I would also take it or leave it, but I would be interested to explore differentiated pricing on our parking for vehicle size and weight. I don't know if it's possible, but the Park Mobile app has your VIN. It knows what your make and model of the vehicle is. There is a social cost that is imposed on us from larger vehicles. Again, this is not a judgment. It's a cost allocation. And if there's any way to give any kind of preferential pricing to lighter vehicles, I think that would be very exciting. At least it's something to explore. Either way, I'm happy with everything else. And thanks for all the hard work, Samantha and team.
All right, Matt.
I want to echo the praise on staff for the amount of work. This is multifaceted and pretty deep stuff. So it's great that we've got us this far. My comment around this last piece is just maybe starting with a smaller geographic area based really on intensity. I think it's important where places are already sort of feeling the stressful impacts of an oversaturation of on-street parking is kind of maybe where we start to see if these strategies are effective. And there's a number of those areas, but there's also a number of areas that don't experience that intensity. And so I worry about how much it makes sense for us to impart a bunch of new strategies and solutions to areas where there's no problem. And so I think it's important for us to just start maybe the color around the university or areas where we know there's a high intensity of these parking stressors and see how these pilot measures work. And if they're effective and it's worth expanding, then maybe get there. But I would caution on a citywide process for these, certainly as we come out the gate. Great job,
Right.
everybody.
Tara? You're on mute.
As quick as can be, I just want to agree with Ryan and ask staff to put on their list of possible things in the future to discuss heavy vehicles. And maybe we can take that money and fill our potholes, which our roads are very affected by heavy vehicles. So I agree with you on that. That's it.
All right, Mark.
I also agree with my colleague Ryan's comments. This is an area that I'm very supportive of because it permits experimentation. And to the extent that we design programs and can employ them in limited geographic areas, I think that we could find out what works, what doesn't work, what deserves to have a wider application, and what does not. And some will not, and some will survive and be terrific. And I think that process of experimentation is exactly what we ought to be doing. And I encourage staff to move forward with it.
Hey, Aaron.
Yeah, well said, Mark. I agree with that. idea of experimentation, and I'm supportive of where you're going. I think this has a little more room to kind of play and explore and test and try out, and then figure out exactly how we move forward in the longer term. And then I just wanted to give a shout out. Ryan has brought up a lot of interesting ideas this evening that aren't probably in scope for this ordinance, but hopefully we're taking notes and we can think about what we might be able to come back to in the future. Teresa, given that would be subject to further discussion and potential trade-offs. Thanks.
Okay, and calling on myself, I just want to second what Matt said about possible limited tests or pilots to get some learning about our community. All right, with that, I'd like to just see if we're generally supportive of this, given all the comments we've shared with staff, and ready to move to the next phase of this. So if we could have a show of hands. Okay, that seems to be well supported. And with that, we're concluding our TDM parking amps, all thing parking section. And thank you again to staff for being here and answering all of our questions. We appreciate it so much. And I think we can move on then to the second item, the City Behavioral Health Framework.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Council,
everybody.
and we'll turn right to Director Kurt Fernhaber to introduce the next item.
Good evening, Council. I support the Department of Housing and Human Services. So tonight, well, over the last couple of years, we've heard a lot from community and council around the challenges of behavioral health. There have been questions around who provides what services and what the city's role is in this conversation. And I appreciate that council is interested in behavioral health. And this is our first ever conversation with council on this topic. So tonight, Wendy Shorts will be presenting, and she's led our work in HHS around behavioral health. She provides input to the regional opioid settlement committee. She represented the city on the county's behavioral health roadmap. And she's also led the implementation of our two behavioral health programs of CERT and CARE, one of which she'll be talking about this evening. And she'll also have a host of other city staff, county staff, partners to answer broad questions that you may have on this topic. And with that, I will hand it over to Wendy, who will be driving the presentation.
Thanks so much, Kurt. And just for clarity with the clerk staff, I believe you all are going to be running the slides tonight. There we go. Thank you, Emily. So again, Wendy Schwartz, Housing and Human Services. And again, I would like to thank our great cross-departmental teams that have worked on these projects and my colleagues who are here tonight. And also specifically those community partners that Kurt mentioned that are going to be available for questions tonight, including from Boulder County, Michelle Webb, the Behavioral Health System Manager, and from Clinica Family Health and Wellness, which includes the organization we previously knew as Mental Health Partners. We have Simon Smith, President and CEO, as well as Kate Parker, Executive Vice President for Specialty Behavioral Health. Next slide, please. So in the interest of time, I won't go through all these bullets, but this just gives an overview of what we're going to talk about tonight. Our presentation does have two main sections, the City of Boulder Behavioral Health Framework and the context around that, which will be about the first 3/4 of our 20 minutes. And then an update on community assistance response and engagement, otherwise known as our CARE program. Next slide, please. These are questions for council. The first two are related to our behavioral health framework. And so we'll pause at the end of our first part of our presentation on that topic to discuss those questions with council. The third question is relevant to the CARE program. And so we'll save that one until the end of the presentation after we've covered the CARE section. Next slide, please. I'm going to start out by just briefly defining behavioral health for folks that might not be familiar with that phrase. Behavioral health is an umbrella term encompassing mental health, including substance use disorder. So why do we have a behavioral health framework in the city of Boulder? As Kurt mentioned, this is an area that's been increasingly important, not only here in Boulder, but really across the nation. And it is largely outside of our traditional local government roles and responsibilities. So historically, we really haven't had formal guidance about our role in this area. And so the purpose of this framework is to define the city's role and priorities in supporting behavioral health in Boulder. Next slide, please. This slide highlights a few reasons that behavioral health is important to people in Boulder. You'll see in the graph on the left-hand side of the slide, about nearly 1 in 5 Boulder County residents report experiencing 8 or more days where their mental health was not good in the past 30 days. And if you look a little bit closer on that graph, there's a large percentage that report about half the days in the last month not being good mental health days. And that really tracks with national data that shows that behavioral health impacts at least 1 in 5 adults in the nation. In Colorado, we have the 10th highest suicide rate in the nation. And more than a quarter of our crisis team responses, so that's CERT and CARE, involve some level of suicide concern. Nearly a quarter of that team's responses involve substance use. Out of the 50 states, Colorado ranks 40th in the nation for adult mental health and 44th in the nation for youth mental health. Next slide, please. We're often asked which level of government is responsible for behavioral health. Similar to physical health, access is largely determined by payer sources or insurance status. And those things are largely controlled, or at the very least regulated, by the state and federal governments. And this slide shows 3 broad categories that people generally fall into in terms of insurance status, and that is public insurance, such as Medicare or Medicaid, commercial insurance, or they're uninsured. Next slide, please. This graphic demonstrates some of the challenges, especially for our lowest income residents and the providers that serve them through Medicaid. During COVID, people were allowed to remain on Medicaid continuously without redetermining eligibility. With the end of the public health emergency in 2023, people had to go through redetermination again. And not surprisingly, many people fell off the Medicaid rolls. This graph shows Medicaid enrollment percentage decreases for the states between 2023 and 2024. And you'll see Colorado on the far left with that red bar. And we've got the largest decrease of about 1/3 in our net Medicaid enrollment. Experts estimate that 65% of Coloradans disenrolled from Medicaid lost coverage due to administrative barriers, such as application processing delays. And locally, we know that more than 70% of Clinica's clients who lost Medicaid coverage are now uninsured. Next slide, please. Local government generally plays a supplemental role in behavioral health because most funding, regulation, and healthcare infrastructure is controlled at different levels of government. Still, the city and other local government partners have been doing a lot in this area, both in behavioral health and in something we call the social determinants of health. And when we talk about social determinants of health, we mean non-medical factors that influence health outcomes, such as education, socioeconomic status, neighborhood and built environment, etc. Those have been shown to make a difference in behavioral health. One example would be affordable housing programs. 4 ways the city is currently supporting behavioral health care are direct services. So those are services provided by city employees to the community. Our biggest example locally is CERT and CARE. We also provide very significant funding for community organizations providing behavioral health services primarily through our competitive fund rounds. We do sometimes have unique opportunities with one-time funds, like the startup funds we provided for the Hope Institute Suicide Prevention Clinic through ARPA. We also do collaborative planning and strategy work with other regional organizations, and that helps us make more strategic and impactful investments. And finally, we employ approximately 1,900 people in the city of Boulder, many of whom interact with the public directly, including in critical or crisis situations. We provide a variety of programs through the city's wellness initiatives to support holistic well-being, including emotional well-being, which benefits our employees as well as the community they serve, since most of us do our job better when we're well. Next slide, please. Boulder County has many similar investments and roles to the city. In addition, they have the public health department locally, which focuses on some community level prevention and harm reduction activities in behavioral health. Even though a lot of local government organizations here in the county have been supporting behavioral health, we didn't historically have a joint countywide vision and shared set of information to anchor to for behavioral health strategy. So our partners at Boulder County began a process a few years ago to create the Boulder County Behavioral Health Roadmap, which was approved by the commissioners in 2023. This process included an extensive community engagement effort with multiple convenings and sources of input over the course of a couple of years, with more than 600 stakeholders participating, including myself and other city staff. As part of the process, they also convened an equity advisory board, which developed trusted system criteria to integrate throughout the process and the roadmap document itself. The vision of the Boulder County Behavioral Health Roadmap is toward the bottom of the screen, and it's a little bit small, so I'll read it out loud. All community members get the right mental and behavioral health support at the right time. Create a community of belonging, connection to community, culture, meaning, purpose, and hope. Next slide, please. And here we've got a nice picture of some of our crisis team members. Our city behavioral health framework guides our work under the broader umbrella of the countywide roadmap. Behavioral health is a vast and complex area which the city cannot significantly impact alone. And it certainly would not make sense for the city to duplicate or contradict the extensive work and outreach done to create the roadmap. So these next slides describe the key components of our city framework. Next slide, please. So first, the principles for our behavioral health support. Advocate, don't duplicate. So really making sure we're taking a look at the roles of other organizations and levels of government, and avoiding inadvertently subsidizing things we shouldn't subsidize or duplicating in unhelpful ways. Collaborate and strategically leverage opportunities. We certainly can make deeper impact through strategic investment that leverages that other funding. Maximizing impact with upstream investment. We already have a strong presence in the city in prevention and social determinants of health, and that's an important thing to keep in mind in our principles. Match roles, expertise, and infrastructure. It generally makes sense to maximize existing community infrastructure rather than starting something new. And finally, evaluation outcomes and transparency, really building that data analysis and evaluation into our programs and activities. Next slide, please. So what are our city behavioral health roles? First, augmentations to services already in scope for the city. And so again, to use certain care as an example, it's already in the city's scope to respond to 911 calls. And so this is an augmentation to a service that we already provide and consider in scope. Policy advocacy with our regional partners to really advocate for those important changes at the state and federal level that impact behavioral health in our community. Continued support for local providers and community initiatives, particularly for costs not covered by insurance. Partnership, research, and idea incubation to come up with the best solutions locally with our partners. And finally, continuing to model behavioral health support and leadership as an employer. Next slide, please. The behavioral health spectrum is broad with a lot of community need across that spectrum. All of those areas are important, and so sometimes it is difficult to talk about priorities. However, as discussed earlier, we're in a very challenging funding environment, and there may be difficult choices in the future about where limited resources should go. So the priorities highlighted here are the direction we're taking in approaching our investments and work. It's important to know that it's not within the city's scope or ability to fully sustain or fill gaps in any of these areas, but they are points where we can show advocacy and work with partners to improve. So first, preserving and integrating safety net services. These providers have been taking a big hit for a while now, and we do need a safety net to remain in the community to serve everyone, including some people with significant need and limited resources. When the healthcare safety net fails, it ripples into many other community systems, such as homelessness, child welfare, adult protective services, and others. Service navigation and connection. Even though services can feel very limited at times, it's also true that people are sometimes missing opportunities to take advantage of what is available to them because it's too difficult or overwhelming to navigate. Next, serving people with dual diagnosis and high acuity needs. There are a lot of limitations for people that have complex needs, and this issue again can spill out into the community and other social service systems when it's not addressed. Finally, two issues that come up again and again in various sources of data and stakeholder input, and that's suicide prevention and substance use treatment. These are very prominent issues in Boulder with not enough options to meet the needs. City actions on any of these priorities are aligned to the key principles and roles just presented, as well as with other citywide plans and frameworks. Next slide, please. And so here we come to a pause for our first two questions for council. First, does council have questions on the city's role in behavioral health as defined in the behavioral health framework? And second, does council have questions or feedback on the city's priorities or work with partners in the Boulder County Behavioral Health Roadmap?
Okay, thank you so much. And if you don't mind, yes, perfect. So now I can see everybody. So let's start off with the first question about the role in behavioral health, or maybe we should do 1 and 2. Well, let's try it. Nicole, why don't you kick us off?
Thank you. And thank you so much, Wendy, for this presentation. I so appreciated having an opportunity to think through our different roles, right? And think about the different lanes that each of us can be in. So now my question or answer to the question. My question is really thinking about prevention and where you all see prevention as fitting into the city priorities. Like when I look at it, I'm thinking mostly about the safety net services, just because we know what an impact trauma and kind of severe need especially early in life has on later mental health. But do you see that as the place where we as a city can focus within our lane on prevention as a focus?
Thanks, Nicole. That's a great question. And one of the things that we've talked about is really prevention, and those social determinants of health are a place where the city's had a big presence for a long time. I mean, that really honestly encompasses not only everything that HHS does, but actually some snippets of a lot of other departments in the city as well. And so obviously, for instance, you're not going to be able to easily address your behavioral health issues if you've lost your housing or you're about to lose your housing, right? That you're going to, like, those types of basic needs are going to be front and center and affect your ability to do that. And so one of the reasons that we phrased some of our key principles and our priorities the way that we did is that we don't want to forget our strong foundation in all of those preventative programs that we have and those social determinants of health. But when people talk to us about the additional investments we have or what trade-offs we might make into things that might seem like more traditional, if you will, behavioral health services or more narrowly defined behavioral health services, then we really wanted to call out areas that seem to rise to the top as we've been doing this work with our community members and our partners. Does that answer your question, Nicole?
Yeah, no, it does. Thank you. Just, yeah, appreciate that perspective. Thank you.
Any other questions about this section, Aaron?
Oh, I have one on number 2, if we'll never do that.
Yeah.
Great. So this is about our partners and such. So Wendy, thanks again very much for the presentation and all the work you do in this area, along as well as with all of our partners. Thanks to all of you for being here and all the work you do. So I have a couple questions. One is about the opioid settlement council that we're a participant on. As you all are doing that work, are you looking at the possibility of a big move of some kind that where we could leverage maybe the resources, the annual funding from that over the next, however many, is it 20 years, where we could do something that's not just, you know, a set of small grants every year, but some larger initiative like treatment beds, for example, for which we have a deep need in our community. Is that on the table? Does that look like a possibility at all?
That is absolutely on the table, Mayor, and the Opioid Regional Council, which our city manager sits on, has discussed exactly those matters, as have those of us who support the work through the operations board. And I think there's a lot of appetite to look at those sorts of big collaborative projects where we can try and make those kinds of dents in that very difficult problem. And Michelle, I don't know if you have anything else to add from the county perspective on that.
Well, first of all, thank you all, council members and Wendy, for inviting me to join you to answer questions. Wendy, I think you answered it exactly right. You know, there are opportunities coming up. There were just recently awards that were made that cover the next 2 years. And so during that interim time, I believe the boards will be visiting together to determine what the strategies will be moving forward. Kelly Veit is the person who is responsible for that area from the county, and I'd be happy to connect you all with her if you want more details and vision from her perspective.
Some follow-up information thoughts would be welcome. Thank you, Michelle. And then
Okay. Oh,
just
yeah, go ahead.
following up on that. So that's great to hear. And so I'm going to return to the topic of the need for inpatient beds for substance abuse treatment and other forms of mental health treatment. So there's the opioid money. Are there any other initiatives or possibilities for the creation of more inpatient beds between all of our collaborative work? I'm just, again, talking the deep need for that. Do we have anything else in the works to address that need?
Yeah, Aaron. Oh, and I would be interested in, I saw Kate from Clinica just started to jump in, and I was about to say I would like Kate and or Simon to jump in here too, because that is obviously a big project that does require multiple partners across the country, across the county, as well as being able to really pull down some of those state and federal revenue sources that really go with treatment. So go ahead, Kate.
Sorry about that, Wendy. Thank you all for having us here. I just wanted to chime in, as you all know, with Legacy MHP. We had Warner House, which provided residential services. They were called transitional residential services for folks. And we are in the process of opening a new building in Louisville and looking at, and I'm going to say 3.5, and that's not going to mean anything to you all. But it's a level of care that we provide, and it's higher level of care for substance and residential. There are challenges, and, you know, as Wendy's talking about some of the funding challenges and other, that is not quote unquote inpatient as you talk about it. It is residential. And we do need to move away from social detox services. So we're embedding those together so that we can meet the needs of this community. There's a high cost, and I think the biggest challenge with it is going to be workforce. So we're hoping to open that in April, and we hope that meets some of the needs. It's not going to meet all of the needs, but some of the needs in Boulder County. And we made a very conscious decision about not putting it in the actual city of Boulder. And I just want to be super transparent and call that out because Clinica serves Boulder, Broomfield, and Adams, and there's a need throughout. And so we were trying to look at what's kind of a central location that we can meet the needs of that.
Thanks for that, Kate. These are huge problems and that require a lot of resources and the workforce that you mentioned. I know it's not easy to do, but when we all work together, we have a shot. So thanks for that answer.
Okay, next I have Taisha, then Matt, then Mark.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. The first question I have is just around disaggregation. So this whole report reads as if we only have one type of population. And so I'm eager to get more disaggregated data around race and ethnicity, gender. You mentioned these things in roadmaps and plans, but they're not mentioned and it's not articulated in the who's accessing services. So getting that information, is that information available and how can we access that? And yeah, so that's one of the questions I have, and it also dovetails nicely with the update on when we can expect the evaluation of programs. Again, I feel like I thought that it was supposed to be by the end of the year. Now we're at the beginning of a new year. And although I appreciate this conversation, I would have preferred to have that information prior to hosting this conversation. But I am curious about the status of that. I'm also interested in, I noticed ARPA funds were used as startups, and so just wanted to hear more about the finances of sustaining the programs that we had and any other issues that you see coming. Obviously, our federal government administration has changed, and I noticed that $14 million is contributed by the feds, and so just was curious, any initial thoughts on that. And then lastly, if I read that automating inequality book, and am now curious about if generative AI is used at all in identification, report writing, those kinds of things. So those are some of the initial questions that I have.
Okay.
Thank you for those questions, Councilmember Adams. I will go through your list as I wrote them down. Regarding the request for disaggregated data, we were using the Boulder County Behavioral Health Roadmap document as as the anchor for our framework. And so we've tried to pull subsets of information from the roadmap rather than repeating all the information that the county had in the roadmap. So there is additional information about that data in the roadmap. It may not meet all of your request. And I will also note that one of our objectives this year in HHS, as we go to the next steps in this process, is to dig a little bit deeper in what data is available, what's not, to disaggregate some of that information and really improve on the data we have. So that's the answer to your first question. Regarding evaluation of programs, could you say a little bit more, Councilmember? Unfortunately, I don't think I am aware of the evaluation you're referencing, and so
I'm sorry, is that just exclusive to the housing? I'm talking about the CURT one that we were talking about, and I thought that there was a mental health component that let us know who does what as far as delineating roles and responsibilities, the fiscal responsibilities, as well as the staffing. And then, of course, the quality of the programs we've been implementing around housing and human services.
So I'll add, there's an evaluation that Wendy will be talking about shortly, which I think might be the one you're referring to, which is of the CARE program. It will be.
No.
Okay. Well,
No, I wasn't. It was the comprehensive one. So are those two separate ones? Am I mixing up one that we've been waiting for that was supposed to be done at the end of the year? That's what I was talking about. Is that the
Okay,
CARES
so
one?
the other evaluation, which will be presented to you on February 13th, is the evaluation that was done of our homeless system.
That wasn't inclusive, but then wouldn't that include
that's a
a mental health
collaboration
component?
with, it's a collaboration with Boulder County and Homeless Solutions for Boulder County.
Yes, but isn't there would be mental health and behavioral health information in that study, right?
There would not, no.
Okay. Thank you.
Regarding your question about ARPA and sustainability, we were very intentional in our ARPA investments as described in the framework to make sure that they were things that seemed really to suit one-time funding. So for example, the Hope Institute, they gave us a plan of how they could sustain the services with ongoing funding if we provided the one-time startup funding. And there are other examples like that. So we are overall feeling pretty good about the sustainability of the things that we have funded through ARPA and
okay. Just point of clarification on that, Wendy, because I'm noticing I'm on that page. I'm on page 25. And Elevate Boulder is on that. And so it was my understanding that no funds had been identified to continue that program. But what I'm hearing is that it is actually not the case.
I will ask Elizabeth, would you like to chime in on that? I believe you're correct in that instance, council member.
Okay.
Yes, correct. We're still working on, we just surpassed, as you know, year one of the program. So the next steps are to create those scenarios for what it might look like to continue it forward.
Okay, because $3 million, which is actually the largest amount on this list, is dedicated to that program. So it's really wonderful to know that that's on your radar screen. But again, when we have documentation like this, and people read it, they're going to walk away thinking, oh, you know, that those funds have been secured. So I just want us to be very careful with that. How about the federal funds and any initial indicators? Or Project 25 had a whole section on reducing human services. So I'm just curious if there are, obviously we're still early in the administration, but I am kind of curious on anything that has come out or any indicators that you all are keeping an eye on that we should be keeping an eye on as well.
Well, we are absolutely keeping our eye on those factors, especially things like Medicaid that impact our safety net very heavily. I don't have a more specific answer for you at this time because, as you pointed out, a lot of where this is going to land on the ground is not completely clear. Okay. And again, I don't know if our partners from Clinica have anything else you want to add on that from your perspective.
Yeah, I'm happy. I mean, I'm not going to pretend that I can read the tea leaves of what's going to happen at the federal level any better than anyone else, although I will be in Washington, D.C. in 2 weeks. I think our early indications from our National Association of Community Health Centers is that certainly there's conversations in some spheres about Medicaid and what level of Medicaid funding might be changed or impacted. I think there's a bit of a buoying balance that the Medicaid expansion is popular, including amongst Republican-led governor states. And so likely there will be perhaps more tinkering than full-scale cuts on Medicaid, for example, requiring work requirements for Medicaid recipients and other things like that. Certainly looking at additional screening tactics and things like that along the Medicaid implementation. So we will see. I think it's a hot topic at the state level too, because Medicaid is a federal state matching program, and a large section of general funding at the state level goes to Medicaid programming too.
Awesome. Thank you so
Wendy
much.
shared the slide about the significant decline in Medicaid enrollment in our state, the worst in the country. And that's already a significant challenge for Clinica and for other safety net, because those people lose their health insurance. They continue to be our patients, but we lose the revenue and reimbursement associated with that, which puts just severe strain.
Thank you so much, and I certainly appreciate that. Generative AI and its use or not?
I don't have any information for you on that tonight, council member.
Okay. Awesome. So I would love to get feedback on that. And then my last is around just cultural competence. It's been written everywhere. So I was just curious, one, if our staffing reflects the communities that they're served. I looked at the photo, it didn't appear to be the case. But again, going back to especially having the cultural competence, I know we had a budget line to do assessments on cultural competence, but I am eager to hear more about how we are ensuring that staff who are not racially and ethnically diverse have the cultural competence to work, especially with our Latino, Hispanic communities, as well as all of those that are being disproportionately impacted by the immigration policies coming down the pike. Thank you.
Absolutely. And you're right, Councilmember Adams. We have had a longstanding goal to recruit diverse staff for our programs. And we have had a challenging time in some respects. And part of that has to do with an overall workforce shortage in the area of behavioral health. And so when there's already a shortage of people in that workforce area, and then you're trying to break it down to subsets of people, the recruiting challenge is very significant. We do have 2 members of our crisis teams that do have Spanish language proficiency and do identify as Latinx. And our goal is certainly to always increase our diversity. I mean, because our goal is to have our staff reflect the community that we serve.
Okay, and I saw Teresa's hand pop up. Want to chime in?
This is certainly a complicated area, right? And cultural competency is very, very important. Quotas are, of course, not acceptable, and the city is not looking to fill any sort of quota, but we are always, with all of our staffing, looking to reflect the broader diversity that is in the community.
Awesome. Thank you. And again, we have racial equity goals. So I'm referring to the goals that we have and not referring to anything illegal, but thank you.
Are you all set, Taisha? Okay, great. I think we have Matt, then Mark, then Tara.
Thanks, Tina. Appreciate the update. There's certainly a dynamic challenge in front of us. And it seems like we're always playing from behind, unfortunately. And that's a challenge certainly that may be exacerbated in the coming months or years here. And I just wanted to clarify, Tina, are we responding to sort of questions around question 1, or are we sort of doing the whole platter?
We're doing 1 and 2. 3 is our
Great.
next presentation section.
Great. So we'll do 1 and 2. So I just want to mention what Kate said earlier. I just want to thank Kate for the candor of talking about why there's a new sort of residential treatment facility not in Boulder. As much as we like to have resources here, I think there's also a recognition we can't bear all of the resources for a regional problem. And so we need to see our regional partners share in the resources. So thank you for saying that. And hopefully we can see more of that coming forward. A question I had comes really kind of back to state and federal money, because obviously they tend to be the progenitors where the source of the funds go. Where does that money typically funnel to? Is it funneled directly to the city? Does it funnel to mostly the county? I'm just trying to wonder where's the sort of custody of these resources as they flow into organizations like Clinica and others. And sort of just wondering what's that path?
So, Matt, that does not funnel through the city or the county generally. The way that those things work, and I'll specifically use Medicaid as the example. People who are eligible for the Medicaid program, which has some income requirements and a few other requirements, once they are in that program, then any provider, so the funds flow essentially from the program, which is a state-federal partnership, to providers that bill the program for services like they would bill a private insurance company, for example. And so really the flow is generally from those levels of government to the providers in exchange for that care provided. And there's a lot more complexity to some of that funding flow that I think, and like our super duper experts here, like Simon and Kate, could probably get into a whole lot of variations on that theme that are pretty complex, but that's the easiest answer.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that because I think where I'm trying to get to is, for the sake of certainly maybe the county and the city in particular, our ability to provide resources is largely a self-funding mechanism at both the city and county level. So is that how you characterize that at these regional levels?
That is how I would characterize that at these regional levels.
All right, well, I appreciate that. And so what that gets me to is like the build on question of that is, what is the relative sort of funding comparison between what the city invests in behavioral health and maybe that of the county in behavioral health programs?
Sure. So we covered a bit of this in our document, and we have a much smaller footprint in that behavioral health funding than the county, especially if you're looking at kind of, if you will, the smaller box that's specifically behavioral health rather than the bigger box of the social determinants of health. And so we identified that with about 2 million in terms of ongoing funding, roughly in our community investments, our combined CERT and CARE programs, about another 2 million. And, if we got a little bit more specific like that, there's other one-time funds. But Michelle, do you want to chime in on kind of the dollars from the county side, which I think are going to be a lot more than that 4 million?
Yes, so at the time that the roadmap report was put together, their estimate was a little bit over 11 million, I believe, that the county was contributing towards funding. I want to point out that that was a snapshot in time. So that those numbers were put together in 2023. I believe one area of our focus in the upcoming year when we look at actually implementing the roadmap is coming up with a system that enables us to give an updated snapshot on that. Certainly we know, funding is challenging right now, but to really have an understanding of what it looks like today is important to informing the decisions that we'll all be making together.
Perfect. And Michelle, you almost teed up my next question, which I appreciate, is with regards to the county roadmap as a whole. It's largely like rough $100 million of programs and things. And so I'm curious, where is the county ready to give a clear sense of how do we prioritize and implement and more or less really formalize the roadmap as a path to implementation? So I'm kind of wondering when we get some clarity as to the variety of things mentioned in the roadmap, as to what we can look forward to in certain orders, and what are the paths to funding those things?
Yes. So what I can share with you that might be helpful is, what our focus is on for the upcoming year. So right now, the process that we're in with implementation is very much around those foundational systems. So the project planning pieces, figuring out all of the tasks, the timelines, that kind of thing. And you're right, it is an enormous undertaking. What we're looking at as our areas of focus for the upcoming year, this is informed in part by our Behavioral Health Executive Advisory Board, which the City of Boulder participates in, as does our other partners here, Clinica MHP. We're looking at several different areas. So one is, as a community of partners, how do we come together to do that better coordination and alignment so that we can spot the overlaps in services, spot the opportunities to create more efficiencies, ultimately moving towards that goal of greater access for the community. We'll be working also on that policy work that is referenced as well in the framework that Wendy presented, looking at how we can partner together. So when it comes to those changes that are coming down from the state or coming down at the federal level, we can all be in leadership together to have more strength and influence over those. We will also be looking at that funding and sustainability piece. So having those conversations across our partners, excuse me, to look at, okay, we know some of these fiscal cliffs are coming from different areas, right? Different municipalities and the county too. How do we address those together? How do we partner together in a new way? So much of our system, the reality is it's highly fragmented. And the vision that the roadmap cast is, it doesn't need to be that way. We can come together to do things differently. So a lot of it is about having those conversations and coming up with some sort of systematic way to do that. We will also be looking at evaluation of our efforts and our progress. So putting together KPIs and dashboards to be able to provide, reports to our community on the progress that we're making. And then finally, the other thing that comes to mind for the upcoming year is looking at that workforce piece. So we are partnering with the Behavioral Health Regional Collaborative. So that's a partnership between Boulder County, Jefferson County, and other regional areas. It's in the very early days. We're not sure where that will go, but really trying to plant the seeds for longer term for how do we help support that effort as well. So really, Councilmember Benjamin, what we're looking at is what do we need to focus on in the upcoming year to really lay the foundation to have that bigger plan longer term.
Well, I appreciate you laying out and giving a little sneak preview to those focus areas. I appreciate it. Look forward to more clarity on that. I know that I'm certainly looking forward to some greater clarity, but also what we can champion, because as we talk about, we're working from behind right now on a lot of this, and it's not from a lack of great effort, whether it be from the city, the county, or certainly Clinica and other partners, but the nature of the challenge in front of us. So whatever resources we can get will be quite helpful. So I appreciate that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, Mark and then Tara.
Well, once again, thank you for a really terrific presentation. It was very, very clear. I only have 3 questions. The first is, I noted that in 2023, we provided approximately $2 million in funds for mental health to the county. What's that number for 2024, and what's it projected to be for 2025?
So for the number that you're citing, Mark, that 2 million, most of that was accounted for by some one-time funds we provided to establish the Tribe Recovery House.
Okay.
And in 2024 and 2025, I believe overall we are more in the area of the remainder of that 2 million. That was some ongoing community programming. And I'm not looking at the right page right now. So if I can get back to you in a minute, that would be great.
Get
And I
back to
might
me
need to do
tomorrow.
some follow-up about the 2025.
No worries. Is that money, whatever the number is that in addition in 2025 to the $5 million going to the county as a result of the affordable housing tax for services?
So I'll have Kurt chime in on the affordable housing tax. But in general, I would say yes. And Councilmember Wallach, the way that the funding works that we're referencing, aside from one-time investment opportunities like the Tribe Recovery Home, which was a larger number, for many years, what has been the case is that the county has some programs that can apply through our community process for sources of funding like the Health Equity Fund and the Human Services Fund. And so that is what's reflected in that programming. And I'm just going to phone a friend a minute here. And Elizabeth, do you happen to know any of those totals for 2024 or 2025 on the funding through those various fund rounds for the county?
Also, I think I found the page you're referring to, Councilmember Wallach. Some of the funds
could you just
that
introduce yourself really quickly?
Oh,
I
my
should be
bad.
better about that. Sorry.
Sorry, Elizabeth Crow, Deputy Director of Housing and Human Services. Some of the funds that, in addition to Tribe, and I don't have that number available right in front of me, I'm sorry. Some of the funds that we also allocate to the county for that would be in the behavioral health arena. For example, we have a relatively small contract with Boulder County Community Services to help us coordinate the C Fund, the Substance Education Awareness Fund. Some of those dollars may be included in that as well. That total for 2025, we're still working on the contract, but would be somewhere around $30,000. And some of the other programs that would be listed in the appendix for the grant funds from the Health Equity Fund, Human Services Fund, C Fund. I believe there are some other county grants in there as well. I don't have the Tribe numbers right in front of me either. My bad. But I'll work with Wendy on that as well.
Yeah, at your convenience, please. Two last questions. Kurt, the 14 million that we've allocated towards mental health services, is that money we're spending for affordable housing in the nature of Bluebird or other facilities? I mean, where does that 14 million come from? And I think you're mute.
Thank you, Mark. You could also maybe repeat your first question about the affordable and attainable housing tax, because I didn't quite follow your question.
The question was, is the 2 million that we are providing the county in addition to the $5 million that they are receiving as a result of passage of the affordable housing tax?
So the 2 million that we invested in Tribe, that's a partnership project where we're providing the building and which they're also contributing to, and they're providing the services. I wouldn't really view that as a contribution to the county. It's a contribution to a program that we're both putting resources into. The 5.2 million from the affordable housing and the tax that the county those are resources that the county is putting into existing services that they provide for the community. In part, there will be some behavioral health services in there, I'm sure. I have not seen a breakout though of what services are included in that 5.2 million. but they have described it as such that those are services that support individuals in housing.
And my question for you was in the staff memo, 14 million was included in the mental health category from our affordable housing funds. And I'm asking, is that for facilities like Bluebird, or is it some sort of general allocation of what we've spent in the affordable housing arena?
Okay, I believe those were investments in affordable housing generally, which is, as Wendy spoke about earlier, one of the social determinants of health. So it's associated, but it's not a direct, a directly funded behavioral health service. Wendy was previously making the distinction between direct services and social determinants of health, and affordable housing is a big part of that.
Okay, I do suggest that kind of distorts the picture a little bit, because most people who are in, clients of our affordable housing efforts are not receiving those kinds of services, and it's just a little misleading to me. My last question, I counted contributions to 35 different providers of services for a total of $2.005 million. The question is, should we not be seeking some greater efficiency and consolidation among these groups? I mean, it seems like we are parsing out money in $10,000 increments, and not necessarily looking at how it can be spent most efficiently.
Thanks, Mark. So first I want to note that I did locate the number that you originally asked for 2025, roughly $292,000, so just under $300,000 going to a variety of Boulder County projects through our fund rounds. So that's the answer to your first question. And I think, I mean, you know, your next question is a very good one. And we've had the Human Services Fund for a very long time. And we've had, and there was a time in the city not too long ago, right, where that was kind of our only behavioral health funding, actually, through grants to what used to be called MHP. And then the Health Equity Fund came along with a very specific set of goals and guidelines that were approved by council, and some of them part of the statutory language. And so, you know, so I think as a community, if we think about where our money is going in this area, one thing that's noted is, I think you're right that it seems less clear to some people to talk about the social determinants of health, because those are things that support a lot of basic needs and things around our environment that help us sustain ourselves in overall well-being. But when you look at that list of programs that's part of our appendix, then most of those programs are not specifically just behavioral health. Some of them are, but we really used programs that incorporated behavioral health as one of their goals. And so, you know, as we think about the different needs of people and the organizations in our community that they look to, then, you know, if we were to change course in those fund rounds and carving off a certain amount specifically for behavioral health for only one source, there might be trade-offs. We might be losing things, even though we might gain some in this very challenging, cost prohibitive environment. And it looks like Elizabeth, I think you wanted to make one comment about that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Wendy. I would just echo what Wendy has said, and add that one of the intentional strategies we have with the fund rounds is, since the framework for our funding programs, Health Equity Fund, Human Services Fund, et cetera, are focusing specifically on our low-income population, which is a much more diverse population. part of the goal is really to go where people are already gathered. And Wendy mentioned this really, but if there are organizations that are serving a very particular population, and those organizations are primarily led by the people they're serving, people who identify with the people they're serving, those are really trusted organizations, and people are more likely to have those receive those services in a way that's most useful to them if they can go to those trusted organizations and get it there really well integrated with other programming. The list is there, happy to go into more details if it's helpful, but that is very much an intentional strategy for supporting programs that are providing essential services to community members and that have the ability to add and integrate behavioral health into it.
All right, and I think we'll probably agree to disagree a little bit on that, but it's a very reasonable explanation, and I thank you. And that will be my last question.
All right, Tara.
Well, first I want to thank you for bringing the subject up because, as you said, Kurt, it's the first time, but I think our community is extremely interested in this. It's one of our biggest challenges as a city. It's also so expensive to make a difference in people's lives and so very complicated. First, Wendy, I want to say thank you for your beautiful screenshot. And my first question is how can I get a screenshot of that background? You can
I don't know, it might be rogue background branding here.
I'll be in touch with you to find out how to do it. But
Okay.
my main and only question is that slide where it shows how abysmally we were doing when it came to keeping people on Medicaid and how great North Carolina was doing. And why are we doing so poorly? Is it because we're so bad at administration? Is that really the reason? And so I don't want you to spend like more than a minute because we're super behind schedule, but it was it's very sad. It impacts people so greatly and it impacts the way we can spend our money so greatly. So I'm hoping that the state is doing something about this or not. Are they not? That's really my only question.
Yeah, and I see Simon smiling here, and so he might have something to add, but I'll say that it's I don't think all the reasons for Colorado being at the bottom of the barrel on this are completely known. I will say when you look at what I looked at that North Carolina line and I was like, well, what the heck? There are some states that were sort of late adopters to some of the Affordable Care Act provisions of Medicaid expansion. And so what happened was when they expanded Medicaid during the same period that this was happening, it kind of balanced out for them because it's that net Medicaid enrollment. And so they look a little bit nice on that chart, kind of because they dragged their feet on doing some stuff that the rest of us did years and years ago. And then there really have been some outdated technology and problems in Colorado. I think the state would argue some of those things, but I'll just see if Simon or Kate have anything to add on this topic.
Well, I think, we all like to be proud of Colorado leading lists in lots of different categories, and this is not a proud one to be leading. It's horrible, and it's horrible for our populations. I think it equates to hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Coloradans who've lost their insurance. And many are likely still eligible for Medicaid, but because of poor administration, antiquated systems, hyper complex enrollment processes, including, I think, a 40+ page application. There's so many reasons. There's a lot of anger, frustration at the state level towards how it can be improved. I think is some slow work to improvement, some slowness to acknowledge it on behalf of the state Medicaid agency. So there's a lot of half answers to your question and a huge amount of frustration, and hopefully starting to see some movement in action. Because for providers like us, Clinica had to do 2 rounds of layoffs in the last year. We've had to cut millions of dollars of programming. And most of that is because we had a double-digit drop in Medicaid coverage for patients we're still providing care for with no longer receiving that reimbursement. So it has real powerful impacts on us as safety net providers. And first and foremost on clients who are likely eligible in many cases, but couldn't go through that onerous process.
Terrible.
Can I just jump in real quick?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Aaron.
and I'll defer to Wendy and Simon on what happened in Colorado, but my sister lives in North Carolina as a social worker. They opted into Medicaid last year. So the reason why their numbers would be way up for last year is they only opted into Medicaid expansion last year. But that doesn't explain why we're doing badly.
No, and that's exactly right. So North Carolina was a late adopter of the Medicaid expansion, Obamacare expansion program. So they have that number going up. Just for some perspective, the balance of Medicaid to uninsured patients that Clinica is taking care of now is essentially at where we were pre-Obamacare in 2013, 2014. So we saw a significant rise, and now we're back down to a level of uninsured that's equivalent to wiping out 10 years of expansion and growth. That's a hard number to swallow.
It is. Any other questions on this portion before we move to our next portion that talks about the CARE and CERT program? All right, well, thank you to all of our partners at the county for being here. It was just so appreciated from all of us as we try to figure out this complex landscape of behavioral health. And we're all hopeful for that the work you do will better serve all of us. And thank you again. So with that, let's move to the next part.
Okay, so Emily, I think if we can put the presentation back up, we should be starting on slide 15. There we go. Perfect. Thank you so much. You're on the home stretch here because that part was 3/4 of our presentation. This is the last quarter. And this is about our community assistance response and engagement program, otherwise known as CARE. And CARE responds to 911 or police non-emergency line calls that don't require a police officer and may be better suited to that health-focused response. It is staffed by city mental health clinicians, paramedics, and case managers. It was launched 4 days a week in December of 2023, and then was fully staffed to 7 days a week starting mid-March of 2024. The program operates from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m., 7 days per week, and it complements our existing crisis intervention response team, otherwise known as CERT, which pairs mental health clinicians with police officers in responding to calls. Next slide, please. The goals of the program are first to help people feel supported and able to manage challenges while staying in the community, to increase positive health impacts for community members served by CARE and reduce future emergency services calls for those individuals through connection to ongoing community services, to better use police and fire resources by diverting calls that could be more appropriately served by an alternative response. Next slide, please. In 2024, CARE had a total of 299 responses, follow-up, and case management contacts. This represents approximately 2% of fire department responses and slightly less than 1% of police department responses. And the monthly breakdown of those 299 calls for 2024 is shown on this slide. Responses, you'll kind of see where the numbers and the peaks are here. Started low. We experienced an upward trend with significant dispatch changes we did in July. And then we followed overall dispatch trends of reduced volume in November and December of last year. There are also some seasonal trends that happen in dispatch overall that also impact the CARE program. And we don't have quite enough data yet to separate those seasonal trends from results of things like dispatch changes. Next slide, please. This slide shows peak demand for CARE with higher demand times shown in red and orange and lower demand shown in green and yellow. Hours of the day are across the top of this graph, starting with 0 for midnight, and days of the week are along the left-hand side, starting with Sunday. The busiest times for this program are weekday afternoons and early evenings. So that aligns pretty well with our program hours, which again are 9 a.m. to 7 p.m., 7 days per week. Next slide, please. A few other highlights from CARE in 2024, suicidal ideation and substance use issues. Those really mirror the larger community trends we talked about in the first part of the presentation. It's not surprising that they are very frequent concerns that CARE responds to. There have been some instances where police or ambulance assistance was required after CARE was dispatched to a call. In the case of police, that was 22 times in 2024. And for ambulance service, that was 37 times over the course of the year. And 3 of those times overlapped when there were both police and ambulance services involved. There were 3 arrests in 2024 on CARE calls and 0 uses of force. A note about some of the police assistance that often involves transportation. So for example, if somebody voluntarily wants to go to the walk-in crisis center, and that has to do with the way our secure transportation law works in Colorado. It's a relatively new law, and our staff are currently pursuing a secure transportation license to mitigate some of that issue. Also in 2024, there were 202 referrals to immediate and ongoing treatment options in the community. And more than half of the clients remain in community after contact with CARE. And so that means they work on safety planning or another solution where they don't have to be immediately transported to a more urgent solution. And that's one of our measures that we look at because the research shows that generally people do better when they're able to remain in community. Next slide, please. So the next steps for CARE, we do have a cross-departmental team with staff from HHS, Fire Rescue, and Police Dispatch that meets monthly to analyze program data and make adjustments, and that's going to be continuing this year. We have also contracted, excuse me, with an external evaluator to do further analysis of CARE beginning in the second quarter of 2025, after the first year of full operation is complete. And so with that, we can go to the next slide. And we have our final question for council. Does council have questions on the update related to the CARE program?
All right, Wendy, thank you so much. That was a great overview. Do we have any questions? Aaron.
Hey, Wendy, thanks so much for that update. And I know you've worked hard on that program, so really appreciate everything that you put into that. Just a couple of questions, and that data was really interesting and helpful. I'm seeing once the numbers went up a little bit by mid-year in the last 6 months, it's been averaging maybe a little over a call a day, I think, 36, 35, 28, that kind of a thing, which seems relatively low. And so just maybe your thoughts on why there aren't more opportunities for CARE to respond, or if there are any procedural changes that might increase the number of responses.
Sure, Aaron. And the team, we agree that is lower than we'd like. And so one of the things we are going to be working together on is looking at what adjustments we can make to the program to make sure we are really maximizing the use of those resources in response to community needs. Interestingly enough, even though it is certainly a priority for us to increase the utilization, we took a look at STAR to just kind of think about how we're comparing to a program like that, especially one that's more established. And a couple of just interesting data points for consideration. First of all, on 3 different occasions, we have sent staff on STAR ride-alongs because to learn, especially when we were starting up the program. On all 3 occasions, they went on 1 call per shift. And the discussion with the staff has been that, maybe averaging 2 or 3 calls per shift. And so, we just found that interesting because that is a program that's been going a little bit longer. it's in a much bigger, more densely populated city. We did a little bit of math.
Wendy, actually, just for the folks at home, STAR being the similar program that Denver has been running for the last few years.
Thank you, Aaron. That's a great clarification. So in other words, two answers to your question, Aaron, which is yes, we absolutely agree that those numbers are lower than they need to be. And part of our team's work this year is looking at the adjustments that are going to work best for the community and for city resources. And two, we are actually somewhat in line with the experience of other programs.
Okay, thanks for that answer. Now, one other question is, if somebody were calling dispatch and were aware of the STAR program, would they be able to say, hey, I'd love for the STAR program to come out to this call if possible? Is that something we would?
Do you mean CARE, Aaron?
Yes, sorry, I got myself switched up. CARE. Somebody in Boulder.
Yes, they would. And I know Brad Riggin, our dispatch manager in PD, is on this call. And so Brad, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to this. So people can certainly request the program as they are describing the situation to dispatchers. The dispatcher may have to explain that they might have to send a different type of response because of something going on in the call. Is there anything you'd like to add, Brad?
No, good evening, Brad Riggin, Police and Fire Dispatch Manager. Just to add, when callers call into dispatch, they go through a pretty rigorous triage process. They can certainly request care, but it goes through a triage process with the program that we have, a piece of software that kind of walks dispatchers through question by question and codes out that call appropriately. So while they request care, we do want to make sure there are certain factors like scene safety and there's no major medical issues before we send that response. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, thanks, Brad, for being here tonight and for answering that question and the work that you do. And that makes total sense. You wouldn't expect to just be able to grant that request all the time, but good to hear somebody could make that request and it would be considered.
You bet.
Great. That's all I got. I look forward to that full analysis after the 1-year anniversary of the program and see what that tells us. Thank you so much.
All right, Matt.
That's an erroneous hand that showed up somehow. So my apologies. Don't know how.
Making up some lost time. Okay. Any other questions about this section about care and so? Taisha.
Yeah, just a very quick question. Would somebody mind unpacking a couple examples of situational reactions? It was the largest primary concerns of the care. It's figure 3. Just some examples would be helpful.
Absolutely. And for that, I'm going to ask Lucy Larbalestier, who's our crisis team supervisor, to go ahead and chime in with a few examples here.
Hello, good evening. Can you all see me?
Yes, we can, Lucy.
Great. Lucy Larbalestier, Behavioral Health Crisis Response Manager. Thank you for that question, Councilmember Adams. Situational reactions are, things that happen in somebody's life that cause them to have some sort of reaction that leads either themselves or somebody else to request some further assistance. So that could be something like sometimes we interact with kids in school who've done really badly on a test and they get pretty emotional about it, or they have a fight with friends, or it could be somebody who's going through a relationship breakup where it's not necessarily tied to a mental illness or a particular diagnosis, but it's really it's things that happen in your life, and sometimes the reaction is very large and folks need more support.
Okay, and it was more so the confusing piece for me was anxiety was listed on the list and just some of these other pieces. So I just wasn't clear on that. So it sounds like a formal diagnosis of anxiety, aggression versus I I
Yeah,
understand.
I
Thank
think
you. It's still a little slippery.
is there something else I could further clarify there for you?
Um, you know, I think it's more so just the differentiation. Again, I can imagine situations that involve drugs. So would that be a substance abuse? I can imagine situations that would make folks feel depressed. I can feel, you know what I mean? So aggression is another when there's, you know, aggression of any kind. So I'm just trying to differentiate because that one has the largest, and I just wasn't sure if that's more of a catch-all, if there's no formal kind of after the formal screenings and it kind of falls there.
Yeah, no, I would say so. The clinicians on the team can select up to 3 categories. So we have a list of kind of buckets of things that we've found over the years that crisis situations tend to fall into, and certainly substance use, substance intoxication. Those are one categories that we include, and so folks can fall into multiple categories, right? That it might be, yes, somebody might have a substance use history. They may be using substances, and then on top of that, something happened and they had a reaction. And there might also be a more formal diagnosis or something going on that we also note.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, I'm not seeing any other hands. So with that, I just want to thank everyone who worked on this presentation as well. This was really helpful, and I know we're all looking forward to see how the analysis is. So thank you so much. With that, I think we can move to our last item, which are the council committee appointments for 2025. So there was a request to have council members to express any interest in changes. We didn't receive any requests outside of that of Councilmember Wallach, who wanted to stay on the long-term financial services team, if I have that correct, Mark.
That is correct. Thank you.
Okay. And then I see Taisha's hands up.
Yes. I saw that the NLC spot was empty, and so just wanted to raise my hand for that. Especially since I no longer have the Stewardship Council, which has been dissolved. So just wanted to lift up that I have additional availability. I did check in with some folks that have more things to see if they wanted to keep theirs. They did. So just wanting to lift that up as an opening. I also just had a comment around, I had asked maybe 6 months ago to get an update on council appointments. And I just think it's curious that we have time slated for this conversation, which doesn't even seem to be necessary, and not time for the update. So just kind of curious where that request landed and if there is opportunities to provide updates from the councils and appointed committees that we are serving on.
Okay, I think let's see, who wants to raise their hand to address that? All right, Teresa.
I'm happy to defer to the mayor.
Okay.
Well, I can just address half of it, just that Taisha, we generally reaffirm our committee assignments on an annual basis. So each year, near the beginning of the year, we pass a measure that essentially appoints people to those committees so that we have official standing on those committees. So I'll let Teresa answer the question why we're not talking about your other request, but anyway, that's why this is coming, because we do that.
Well, I guess it's more of just disappointment that time has been slated to do this and not to allow us to provide updates on our respective committees. I know that I have some that I would love to be able to share outside of a hotline, and there are some appointments again around Boulder Housing Partners, right? Like there's some serious support, and it's wonderful that we're able to follow up. Thank you to my fellow council members who provide information on their respective appointments. But again, I think it's helpful for us to have that conversation. I know I'm breaking the rules and it is what it is because apparently that's but it's more so just something that I'm expressing frustration around and concerned that around having that. So again, I will make the request again, but it would I mean, and also even if, you know, if we're trying to make those kind of transitions, it would be helpful to know what is the state of the work, what is the nature of the work, those kinds of things. So, yeah, yeah, I'm sorry I did not have the NLC request in advance, but
Can I colloquy real
Sure.
quick on that? Just for clarity, I believe the NLC is a unique one where anybody on council can participate in that. So it's not limited or anyone has to reserve that. So in that one in particular, I think is kind of is an open one for all. In that particular, I think I have that correct with regards to NLC, which is kind of nice because then people aren't having to, you know, pick and negotiate. So that's a one that anybody
Right.
can attach for. So have at it and enjoy.
Well, I think it's more so similar to CML, right? We have somebody who's appointed to that. They are supposed to go, and we don't have somebody appointed to the national component. So there seems to be some inconsistencies there that I would love for us to think about addressing. So if this isn't the forum to do that, then I'm happy to do that. You know, again, if you're not going to the NLC conference, if you're not going to the Sydney Summit, then you're not representing us there. So, you know, I'm planning on going again to the national. I went to another city summit as well. I read emails, I share opportunities around webinars, etc. I'm already doing the work, and I'm offering to you know, be that point person in lieu of the ad hoc, which has not served us in at least since I have been on council.
Okay. Aaron.
Oh, just that I was just going to thank Taisha, thanks for stepping up on the NLC to move from the ad hoc to the formal. It would be great to have a formal representative to that body because we get a lot from it. So thanks for stepping up for that.
And Aaron, can other people still go to the conference if they're interested?
Yeah, there are actually councils that send their entire city council to the conferences.
And we have a Colorado section and it's very popular, and we have meetings and we talk to each other and all of the wonderful things. So I hope other people, thank you, Nicole and Lauren, for joining me last year. And I'm hopeful that others will join as well.
Okay, great. Well, that's a good addition to our appointments. Are there any other comments about the appointments for next year for the upcoming 2025? Alicia.
Hello, Council. Alicia Johnson, serving you as your city clerk. I just wanted to just reiterate that with the NLC, like Matt said, any council member can go. And if there's any other council member that wants to be the official member, please let us know. We'll go ahead and document that on the paperwork that we're going to submit for the appointment of the committee members. So thanks, Matt.
Awesome. Thank you. And again, I also attend the CML conference. So Matt, it's wonderful to have you, but it's also wonderful to be able to attend those as well. I did have
Tina's also Tina is also our rep at CML as well. So that we get 2 reps at CML, which is quite awesome.
Yeah, I would love us to have 2 for NLC as well. So, but in the interim, I did want to
on
give
the National League of Cities one. I do want to clarify, apologies, Councilmember Adams, back with our contacts at that organization, if there's a formal committee that you would be sitting on or not. It's not clear to me. And just because this is a formal motion to vote on assignments for specific representation, if we don't know what the job is, we'll want to clarify that before preparing the consent item. So we'll follow up with you on some information on how we currently interact with NLC, just so that we don't say yes to a position that doesn't exist, and then we'll clean up our list as well.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Hold on one sec. Teresa has her hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Pam said, that we're not actually voting on anything because it's a study session, but we're coming to consensus and expressing interest.
Awesome, thank you. I did want to just share a couple of time-sensitive things around the Stewardship Council, which was disbanded, to say that there is a Downwinders Day on Monday, January 27th at the Arvada Library. Again, there are still concerns around the site, and there was a collective interest to continue to stay abreast, although we were not going to be formal members. So I did want to let folks know that is happening. And there's also going to be a film screening of Half-Life of Memory, America's Forgotten Atomic Bomb Factory, which is going to feature Rocky Flats. And that is going to be at the Denver University. And I will share that information with Megs to get that out as well. But as that council is disbanding, I just wanted you to know that obviously I won't be going, but I will still continue to stay abreast on all things nuclear. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Taisha. So with that, I think we're at the end of our meeting and about 11 minutes early. If everyone's okay, I'd like to call us to an end and thank you all for your time. So, bye.
Nice work, Tina.
Thanks,
Good
Tina.
job.
Appreciate
Thanks,
the extra
Tina.
time.
Take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Good night.